I am Keisha Banks, 32 years old. And when my father married a woman who cared more about designer labels than family loyalty, I kept the $45 million shipping trust my late grandfather left me a complete secret. It turned out to be the smartest decision I ever made. Just days after an explosive family dinner, my father's new wife showed up at my door uninvited with a cutthroat asset lawyer at her side. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to protect your peace and your legacy from toxic relatives who only see you as a walking bank account. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, my family was always overly concerned with appearances. My father, Reginald, ran a regional printing and logistics company that provided a very comfortable upper-middle-class life. But comfortable was never enough for him. He wanted to be part of the city's elite. He spent decades chasing country club memberships, buying expensive cars on credit, and rubbing elbows with local politicians. He drained his own business accounts to look wealthy rather than actually building sustainable wealth. My grandfather, Elijah, saw right through the facade. Grandpa Elijah built a shipping empire from a single delivery truck in the 1970s. He was a man of immense grit, calloused hands, and sharp business acumen. He taught me everything I know about strategy and self-reliance, while my father was busy grooming my younger sister Tanisha to be the perfect high society trophy. The real fracture in our family happened tonight at an upscale Black-owned soul food fusion restaurant in downtown Atlanta. The ambiance was incredible, with live jazz floating through the dining room and crystal chandeliers casting a warm, beautiful glow over tables filled with the city's heavy hitters. I had agreed to this dinner hoping we could just get through a simple meal without any underlying drama. I really should have known better. We were seated at a private plush corner booth. The table was covered in plates of truffle macaroni and cheese, braised collard greens, and beautifully seared snapper, but the tension was so thick that nobody was actually eating. Sitting directly across from me was Yvette, my father's new wife. Yvette is 46, meticulously groomed and entirely driven by financial desperation disguised as high fashion. She wore a tailored designer suit that probably cost more than my father's printing business cleared in a month. Next to her sat my father, shrinking into his seat as he usually did when she took control of a room. To my right sat Tanisha, the golden child dripping in Cartier jewelry, and her white husband Preston Gallagher, a corporate development consultant whose smug sense of superiority always made my skin crawl. I was taking a sip of my sparkling water when Yvette reached into her oversized designer bag and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. She did not say a single word at first. She just slid the heavy papers across the white linen tablecloth until they bumped directly against my water glass. Then she placed a crisp, printed check right on top of the stack. I looked down. The check was made out to me for exactly $5,000. "Sign the relinquishment forms," Keisha, Yvette said, her voice dripping with that fake Southern sweetness she used to mask her absolute venom. "We need to restructure your grandfather's estate immediately. The family business needs a major capital injection, and $5,000 is more than enough to cover whatever little makeup projects you are playing around with these days." I set my glass down slowly. The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the heavy air of the restaurant. I am the creative director for a multi-million-dollar beauty and lifestyle brand. I lead global campaigns celebrating natural hair and Black excellence. Yet to Yvette and my father, I was just a glorified makeup salesperson because I did not follow their traditional country club path or seek validation from their wealthy friends. I did not touch the pen she aggressively placed next to the papers. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms, and looked her dead in the eye. $5,000 for a shipping trust, valued at $45 million. I asked, my voice calm, but loud enough for Preston and Tanisha to hear clearly. "You must be out of your mind, Yvette. You have absolutely no legal standing here, and neither does my father." Preston scoffed loudly, adjusting his expensive watch and leaning over the table. "Now, Keisha, let us be reasonable here. Family assets need to serve the collective financial legacy. Your father's printing business has some temporary liquidity issues, and the massive capital tied up in Elijah's trust could generate huge returns if properly managed by professionals. You are hoarding wealth you do not even know how to handle. I turned my gaze slowly to my brother-in-law. Preston, you run a venture capital firm that is currently bleeding top-tier clients because you misread the market for 2 consecutive quarters. Do not sit here and talk to me about managing wealth when your entire business model is built on burning through other people's money to fund your corporate retreats. Tanisha slammed her palm on the table, causing the expensive silverware to rattle against the plates. Do not talk to my husband like that. She snapped, her voice rising above the jazz music. You have always been so jealous of us, Keisha. Always acting like you are better than this family just because Grandpa Elijah felt sorry for you. He gave you that money because he knew you would end up a lonely spinster mixing cheap lotions in your kitchen while everyone else moved forward in life. My father finally found his voice. Keisha, that is absolutely enough. He slammed his own fist down, making the water glasses shake violently. You will respect your sister, and you will respect my wife. We are your family, and we are telling you what needs to be done for the greater good. Your grandfather was an old man making emotional, reckless decisions at the end of his life. He should have left that trust to me to secure our family legacy in this city. Dad, you spent 20 years using Grandpa's emergency funds to pay for your golf trips and Tanisha's European vacations, I replied, keeping my voice dangerously steady. You literally bought Tanisha's mansion down payment while your own printing presses were breaking down and your employees were waiting on delayed paychecks. Grandpa Elijah bypassed you because he knew you would hand his entire life's work over to the first social climber who batted her eyelashes at you. Yvette's face turned a dangerous mottled shade of red. You ungrateful little brat, she hissed, dropping the sweet act entirely and leaning across the table. You are sitting here wearing off-the-rack clothes, acting like you own the entire city. You are an absolute disgrace to the bank's name. Since you want to be so fiercely independent, you can pay the bill tonight. Consider it your contribution to the family you constantly disrespect and avoid. She quickly signaled the waiter who nervously approached our tense table, and she practically shoved the leather checkbook into his hands, gesturing toward me. The bill was exactly $1,200. They had ordered top-shelf liquor, premium steaks, and multiple extravagant appetizers before I even arrived at the restaurant. I looked at the exorbitant bill, then looked at Yvette's triumphant, nasty smirk. She truly thought she was humiliating me, putting a heavy financial burden on the struggling creative she assumed I still was. Tanisha leaned into Preston, whispering something and laughing behind her hand, enjoying the show. I reached into my purse and pulled out my corporate platinum card, the heavy metal one reserved exclusively for top executives at my brand. I dropped it onto the leather tray with a loud, solid clack that immediately silenced the entire table. Put it all on this, I told the waiter with a warm, genuine smile. And please add a 30% tip for dealing with this incredibly difficult table tonight. The waiter nodded, his eyes widening slightly at the card, and hurried away to process the payment. Yvette stared at the metal card, her eyes narrowing in confusion as she tried to calculate how a makeup salesperson could carry that kind of elite credit. I stood up, smoothing the front of my dress and grabbing my purse. I am not signing your papers, Yvette. I am not bailing out Dad's failing printing company, and I am certainly not funding Preston's disastrous venture capital firm. Grandpa Elijah's legacy is safe exactly where he put it, and none of you will ever see a single dime. Tanisha glared at me, her perfectly contoured face twisted in pure, unadulterated anger. You will regret this, Keisha. You cannot just walk away from us like we are nothing. We will take what belongs to this family, whether you like it or not. I did not grace her with a response. I turned my back on my father and his toxic inner circle, leaving the unsigned legal document sitting next to their half-eaten food, and walked straight out of the dining room. The heavy wooden doors of the restaurant closed behind me, muffling the sound of their arguing voices. Stepping out into the warm, humid Atlanta night, I took a deep, long breath, letting the fresh air clear the suffocating tension from my lungs. The street was alive with the vibrant, pulsing energy of the city, but my mind was completely focused on the massive betrayal I had just experienced. It was one thing for my father to be a coward, who could not manage his own finances, but allowing his new wife and my sister's arrogant husband to actively plot against my grandfather's estate was a completely new low. I walked down the brightly illuminated sidewalk toward the valet stand, my heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement. My mind raced with vivid memories of Grandpa Elijah. He used to sit me down at his old wooden kitchen table, showing me complicated ledgers and shipping manifests, teaching me exactly how to read profit margins and spot bad investments. He did this while my father was out buying custom-tailored suits he could not afford and attending charity galas just to get his picture in the local society pages. Elijah knew this day would eventually come. He explicitly structured the trust to ensure Reginald could never legally touch the principal, knowing his son would squander it to impress strangers. As I approached the valet booth, I saw Mr. Sterling, an older black man who had worked at this establishment for years. He always deeply reminded me of my grandfather, moving with a quiet, dignified grace and speaking with a wisdom that only comes from years of hard work, despite the demanding nature of his job dealing with entitled customers. "Good evening, Miss Keisha," he said, tipping his hat slightly as he saw me approach. "Leaving us so soon tonight?" "It was a very brief dinner, Mr. Sterling," I replied, offering him a genuine, tired smile. "Some meals just leave a bitter taste no matter how good the chef is." He chuckled, a deep, rich, knowing sound that made me feel instantly grounded. "I hear that loud and clear. Some folks just bring their own sour seasoning to the table. Let me get your car right up for you." While he radioed for my vehicle, I stood under the glowing street lamps watching the luxury cars pull up and drop off patrons eager for a night out. I thought about Tanisha sitting in that restaurant demanding my inheritance while enjoying a lavish lifestyle funded entirely by continuous handouts. When she wanted to buy her massive mansion in Buckhead, my father liquidated a huge portion of his business assets to cover her down payment, leaving his company vulnerable. When Preston wanted to start his consulting firm, my father foolishly co-signed the initial business loans. They built their entire reality on a fragile foundation of debt and familial guilt, while I had worked 80-hour weeks to build my career and honor my grandfather's strict work ethic. Mr. Sterling pulled my sleek, dark sedan up to the curb. It was a reliable premium vehicle, not overly flashy, but completely paid for with my own hard-earned money. I handed him a crisp $50 bill, making sure to press it firmly into his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling. You have a blessed and safe night. You do the exact same." "Miss Keisha," he said, closing my door securely and giving me a respectful nod. The interior of the car was perfectly quiet, a stark welcome contrast to the chaotic noise of the restaurant and the busy street. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment, resting my forehead against the cool leather of the steering wheel. The emotional toll of dealing with my family's relentless demands was always exhausting, but tonight felt fundamentally different. There was a desperate, aggressive edge to Yvette and Preston's behavior that deeply worried me. They were acting like people who were completely out of options. Before I could put the car into gear, my phone buzzed brightly in the center cup holder. The screen illuminated the dark cabin, showing an urgent text message from David, my personal wealth manager, who oversaw the massive trust accounts. I picked up the phone, swiping open the message with a sudden sense of dread. The words on the screen made my blood run absolutely cold. "Keisha, we have a massive situation. A local high-powered law firm just filed an emergency petition to freeze the trust accounts. They are initiating a formal validity challenge claiming Elijah was suffering from severe mental incapacitation when he signed the estate over to you. We need to meet first thing tomorrow morning." I stared at the glowing screen, reading the insulting words, "mental incapacitation," over and over again. It was a profound, disgusting insult to a man whose mind remained razor-sharp and brilliant until his final breath. Yvette and my father were not just asking for money anymore. They were actively trying to rewrite history legally, declaring a brilliant, hardworking black man incompetent just to get their greedy hands on his wealth. They had officially declared war on my peace and my legacy. I placed the phone back in the cup holder, put the car in drive, and pulled out into the heavy Atlanta traffic. They thought they could easily intimidate me with aggressive legal jargon and thick family guilt, but they had vastly underestimated the strong woman Grandpa Elijah raised. I was not going to let them destroy his legacy to pay for their mistakes. I was going to fight back with everything I had, and I was going to use every single resource at my disposal to do it. Keisha, get back here right now! My father's voice cracked like a cheap whip across the dining room, cutting right through the smooth jazz saxophone playing in the corner. You do not walk away from your family. You get back here and act like a proper bankswoman. I did not break my stride. The sharp clack of my stilettos against the polished hardwood floor was the only answer I cared to give him. A proper bankswoman in his eyes meant bowing my head, biting my tongue, and letting people like Yvette treat me like a human ATM machine. It meant shrinking myself down so his fragile ego could take up all the oxygen in the room. I pushed through the heavy brass double doors of the restaurant, leaving the suffocating air of fake pleasantries behind me. The warm Atlanta night hit my face instantly. It smelled like rain and exhaust, a chaotic urban mix that felt infinitely more honest than the overpriced truffle macaroni sitting on that tense table. As I marched down the illuminated sidewalk toward the valet stand, my blood was still running incredibly hot. The sheer audacity of Tanisha sitting there dripping in Cartier diamonds she definitely did not buy, demanding I hand over my legacy, was laughable. My sister had never worked a 40-hour week in her entire life. She treated our father's printing business like a personal slush fund. When she decided she simply had to live in Buckhead because her high society friends were moving there, my father quietly liquidated a massive chunk of his commercial presses just to cover her multi-million-dollar down payment. He put his own long-term employees' jobs at serious risk so his golden child could host garden parties and hire personal chefs. And when Preston decided he wanted to play hotshot venture capitalist, my father foolishly co-signed the massive commercial loans that kept that sinking ship afloat. They built their entire reality on a fragile foundation of my father's crippling debt and profound guilt. Meanwhile, I spent the last 10 years clawing my way up the corporate ladder at a global beauty brand. I slept in my office, I missed holidays, and I built inclusive marketing campaigns from the ground up, because Grandpa Elijah taught me that nobody respects a crown they did not earn. Tanisha wanted the crown without the sweat, and now she wanted Grandpa's money to pay for her husband's catastrophic business failures. I reached the valet stand where a small line of patrons stood tapping their designer shoes and impatiently checking their luxury watches. I bypassed the complaining crowd and walked right up to the podium. Mr. Sterling, an older black man with silver hair and a deeply lined face, was organizing keys. He always reminded me so much of my grandfather. He carried himself with a quiet, dignified grace that demanded respect regardless of the uniform he wore. My father and Yvette would not even look Mr. Sterling in the eye when they handed him their keys, treating him like an invisible fixture meant only to serve them. Grandpa Elijah used to say, "You measure a person's actual wealth by how they treat the folks serving their food and parking their cars." "Good evening, Miss Keisha," Mr. Sterling said, tipping his cap slightly as he recognized me. "You are out early tonight. I thought you Banks folks usually shut the place down." "Not tonight, Mr. Sterling," I said, offering him a warm, genuine smile. "Some meals just leave a bitter taste no matter how much you pay the chef. I think I have had my fill of family bonding for one evening. Sometimes the people who share your blood are the quickest to try and drain it." He chuckled, a deep rumbling sound that made me feel instantly grounded. "I hear that loud and clear. Sometimes the heaviest luggage we carry is our own kinfolk. They will weigh you down and ask you why you are not walking faster. Let me pull your car right around front for you." I watched him signal one of the younger drivers, while other people in my family drove imported European sports cars on predatory lease terms just to show off for people they secretly hated. I drove a fully paid-off premium sedan. It was sleek, reliable, and entirely mine. There was no bank waiting to repossess it, and no father holding the title over my head to control my decisions. When the car pulled up, I reached into my purse and pulled out a crisp $50 bill, folding it neatly, before pressing it firmly into Mr. Sterling's hand. "You have a blessed and safe night, Mr. Sterling. Do not let these people work you too hard. You do the exact same." "Miss Keisha," he said, closing my driver's side door with a solid thud. "You keep your head up and do not let nobody dim your light." The interior of my car was a sanctuary of perfect silence. The thick acoustic glass completely blocked out the noise of the bustling Atlanta streets. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, letting my head fall back against the leather headrest and closing my eyes. The emotional exhaustion of dealing with my family's relentless demands was a familiar weight, but tonight felt fundamentally different. There was a desperate, aggressive edge to Yvette and Preston's behavior at the table. They were not just fishing for a routine bailout to cover a bad month of spending. They were acting like cornered animals fighting for their very survival. Preston's venture capital firm must be in far worse shape than I originally calculated, and Yvette's social climbing debts were clearly catching up with her fast. Before I could shift the car into drive, my phone lit up brightly in the center console. The screen flashed with an urgent text notification from David, my personal wealth manager. David was a brilliant financial strategist who handled the day-to-day operations of Grandpa Elijah's trust, and he never texted me outside of business hours unless something was catastrophically wrong. He was a professional who valued boundaries, so seeing his name pop up at 9 at night made my stomach drop instantly. I picked up the phone, swiping open the message. The words on the glowing screen made the temperature in the car feel like it dropped 10 degrees. "Keisha, we have a massive situation. A high-powered local law firm just filed an emergency petition to freeze all the trust accounts. They are initiating a formal validity challenge against the estate. The filing claims Elijah was suffering from severe mental incapacitation when he signed the assets over to you. They are demanding a full restructuring of the $45 million. We need to meet first thing tomorrow morning." I stared at the screen, reading the insulting words "mental incapacitation" over and over again until my vision physically blurred with rage. It was a profound, disgusting insult to a man whose mind remained razor-sharp and brilliant until his very last breath. Grandpa Elijah had reviewed shipping manifests and negotiated vendor contracts from his hospital bed. He was sharper on his worst day than Preston, and my father were on their best. Yvette and my father were not just asking for a handout anymore. They were actively trying to rewrite history legally, declaring a hardworking self-made black man incompetent just to get their greedy hands on his wealth. They had officially declared war on my peace and my grandfather's legacy. They thought they could easily intimidate me with aggressive legal jargon and heavy-handed family guilt. They assumed I would fold to protect the family reputation in Atlanta high society. They had vastly underestimated the woman they were dealing with. I dropped the phone back into the console, shifted the car into gear, and pulled out into the heavy city traffic. I was not going to settle, and I was not going to hide. I was going to crush them completely. 3 days after the disastrous dinner, my morning started with the sharp, urgent buzz of the building intercom. I was standing in the kitchen of my downtown luxury loft reviewing digital mock-ups for an upcoming marketing campaign. The sunlight was pouring through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the polished concrete floors. It was a space I had bought and meticulously renovated with my own money long before I ever knew about the shipping trust. I pressed the intercom button, expecting my scheduled grocery delivery. Instead, the panicked voice of my usually calm concierge filled the speaker. He started to apologize, explaining that a woman had aggressively bypassed the front desk by slipping into the private secure elevator behind another resident. Before he could even finish his sentence, a violent pounding echoed through my loft. Someone was hammering their fists against my heavy oak front door with absolute fury. I set my tablet down on the granite counter and walked slowly toward the foyer. I did not rush. I knew exactly who was on the other side of that wood. When I pulled the door open, Yvette was standing right on my welcome mat, breathing heavily with her arms firmly crossed over her chest. She was wearing another sharply tailored suit, this one a stark white that made her look like she was dressed for a courtroom battle. She was not alone. Standing half a step behind her was a tall, broad-shouldered man in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a thick leather briefcase. He had the cold, calculating eyes of a man who made his living terrorizing people into submission. I stood dead center in the doorway, planting my feet firmly on the threshold. I did not step aside. I did not offer them a polite greeting or a seat inside. I just stared at Yvette, waiting for her to speak. "Are you going to invite us in?" "Keisha?" Yvette demanded, her voice tight with suppressed anger. "We have extremely urgent business to discuss, and I am not doing it standing out here in a public hallway like some common delivery person." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms to mirror her defensive posture. "My loft is for invited guests only, Yvette. Since you decided to ambush me at my own home, whatever you have to say can be said right here on the mat. State your business and leave." The man in the charcoal suit stepped forward, attempting to physically dominate the space by towering over me. He tried to push past my shoulder, but I held my ground, forcing him to stop in the hallway. He opened his leather briefcase with a crisp snap and pulled out a thick manila envelope, holding it out toward me like a weapon. "My name is Attorney Lawrence Cross," he said, his voice slick and incredibly patronizing. "I represent your father, Reginald Banks, and his wife, Yvette. We are formally serving you with a demand letter regarding the immediate release of the Elijah Banks Shipping Trust." He shoved the envelope closer to my chest, but I kept my arms crossed, refusing to take it. Attorney Cross did not miss a beat. He smoothly opened the envelope himself, pulling out the top document with a theatrical flourish. "Since you refuse to accept the physical copy, I will verbally inform you of its contents," he continued, speaking loudly enough for the neighboring lofts to hear. "We are preparing to file a high-profile civil lawsuit against you for elder financial manipulation. We have gathered initial testimonies indicating that you systematically isolated your grandfather during his final declining months. You took advantage of a vulnerable sick man and coerced him into signing away a $45 million estate that rightfully belongs to his biological son." The accusation was so grotesque, so entirely detached from reality, that it actually made my stomach turn. They were painting me as a predator when I was the only person who had actually sat by Grandpa Elijah's side when his lungs were failing. I looked at Lawrence Cross, taking in his expensive suit and his arrogant, professional smirk. Then I shifted my gaze directly to Yvette, who was standing there pretending to look like a concerned, grieving family member. "Elder financial manipulation," I repeated, letting the heavy words hang in the quiet hallway. "That is a fascinating legal strategy, Attorney Cross. Tell me, did your client mention exactly where she was during those final declining months when I was supposedly isolating my grandfather from his loving family?" Cross opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off immediately, stepping forward so Yvette was forced to look me directly in the eyes. "Let me fill in the blank spaces for you, counselor. While my grandfather was in hospice care, struggling to breathe and asking why his only son had not come to visit him, Yvette was flying first class to Paris Fashion Week." I watched the color rapidly drain from Yvette's perfectly contoured face. She opened her mouth to speak, but I did not give her the chance. I kept my voice incredibly calm, delivering every single word with surgical precision. "She spent 2 entire weeks staying at a 5-star hotel on the Champs-Élysées, buying limited edition designer handbags, and drinking vintage champagne on my father's rapidly shrinking credit limit. She did not return to Atlanta until after the funeral arrangements were already finalized and paid for entirely by me. So do not come to my home and throw around fabricated legal terms like elder manipulation." I continued, my voice rising with righteous conviction. "If you want to talk about financial manipulation, we can pull my father's bank statements from that exact month. We can show a judge exactly who was bleeding a dying man's family dry while I was holding his frail hand in a sterile hospital room, listening to the heart monitor slowly fade out." Yvette took a sudden step back, her false bravado fracturing under the weight of the absolute truth. "You are a liar," she spat, her voice trembling slightly as she glanced nervously at her high-priced lawyer. "We were conducting essential international business for the printing company." I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed loudly off the hallway walls. "You do not even know how to turn on a commercial printing press, Yvette. You were shopping. You are bankrupting my father, and now you think you can use a sleazy lawyer to bully me into handing over $45 million to fix your massive hidden debts. I finally reached out and snatched the thick demand letter right out of Attorney Cross's hand. I did not even look at the printed pages. I looked right at the lawyer. You can file whatever frivolous lawsuit you want, I told him, my tone dropping to a dangerous, unyielding whisper. But you should know right now that you are backing a losing horse. You think you are here to intimidate a scared little girl, but you are standing in front of a woman who built her own empire from scratch. You want to drag my grandfather's good name into a courtroom for a quick cash grab. I will personally make sure the entire city of Atlanta sees exactly where Yvette's money is really going. The moment those words left my mouth, the fake fragile stepmother routine vanished completely. Yvette dropped the act like a heavy stage curtain. Her shoulders squared and the manufactured tears brimming in her eyes dried up instantly. The soft southern drawl she had spent years perfecting for my father's country club dinners was replaced by a sharp, venomous tone that belonged in a back alley rather than a luxury high-rise. You listen to me, you arrogant little girl, Yvette hissed, taking a step forward so her face was inches from mine. You think you are completely untouchable sitting up here in your glass tower playing corporate executive. But you are nothing. You are a glorified makeup artist who got lucky with a dying man's pity. I did not back away. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate look at her from head to toe. My career in the upper echelons of the beauty and lifestyle industry requires me to have a razor-sharp eye for detail branding and luxury goods. I know what things cost, and I know exactly what it takes to acquire them. My gaze landed squarely on the handbag clutched tightly in Yvette's manicured hands. It was a matte white Himalayan crocodile Hermes Birkin. It was not a fake, and it was not a vintage resale. It was a pristine limited edition piece that required not only a massive ungodly sum of money, but also an extensive purchase history, with the brand just to be offered the privilege of buying it. The retail price was easily over $150,000, but on the secondary market, it could fetch double. My mind immediately started doing the brutal, unforgiving math. My father's regional printing and logistics company was currently struggling. I knew their quarterly profit margins. I knew the exact cost of their delayed equipment upgrades and the payroll issues they had been having for the last 6 months. Reginald Bank's business did not generate the kind of liquid cash required to fund a $150,000 handbag, let alone the custom Parisian wardrobe Yvette was currently wearing. The math simply was not mathing. She was bleeding my father completely dry, and she had clearly exhausted his credit lines. The desperation radiating off her in waves suddenly made perfect sense. She was not here out of a misplaced sense of family loyalty or a desire to build a legacy. Yvette was drowning in massive hidden debts. She owed money to luxury boutiques, private clubs, and credit card companies, and the $45 million shipping trust was her only remaining life raft. If she did not get her hands on Grandpa Elijah's money, her entire manufactured high society life was going to implode in a spectacular public fashion. You are looking at this all wrong, Yvette, I said, my voice dropping to a calm, deadly register. You think I am playing a game. I am looking at a woman who is absolutely terrified because her husband's bank accounts are tapping out and the boutiques in Buckhead are starting to decline her cards. Her eyes widened slightly, a brief flash of genuine panic betraying her tough exterior, before she covered it up with sheer malice. She pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest. Do not play psychoanalyst with me, Keisha. You have a lot more to lose here than a few credit lines. You love your precious career so much, right? You love being the creative director for a brand that preaches authenticity and Black female empowerment. How empowering do you think it will look when the Atlanta business blogs run a front-page story about how you systematically brainwashed your dementia-ridden grandfather to steal his fortune? Attorney Cross smoothly stepped back into the conversation, seeing his opening to apply leverage. My client is fully prepared to take this matter to the court of public opinion, Miss Banks. We have a drafted press release ready to be distributed to every major news outlet and social media platform. The narrative is incredibly damaging. A wealthy, successful young executive preying on a vulnerable elder in his final days, isolating him from his loving son and wife to secure a $45 million payday. The scandal alone will obliterate your standing in the corporate world. Your brand partners will drop you. Your CEO will be forced to demand your resignation to protect the company image. You will be a pariah before we even see the inside of a courtroom. Yvette smiled, a cruel twisting of her lips that made my stomach turn. We can make all of this go away, Keisha. Right here, right now. Attorney Cross has the restructuring documents in his briefcase. We keep this entirely out of court and entirely out of the press. You sign the trust over to a joint family holding company controlled by your father and me. We assume management of the $45 million, and you get to keep your pristine professional reputation and your cute little job. It is a win for everyone. Refuse, and I will personally make sure you are unemployable in this industry for the rest of your natural life. She was trying to leverage my life's work against my grandfather's legacy. She actually believed I would trade Grandpa Elijah's hard-earned empire just to save myself from a few nasty headlines. She fundamentally misunderstood what I was made of. I did not build my career by cowering to bullies, and I certainly was not going to start today with a desperate social climber. While Yvette was delivering her grand theatrical threat, I had slowly lowered my left hand to my side. With 2 precise taps on my smartwatch screen, I triggered the silent emergency alert programmed directly to the building's front desk security team. It was a feature the luxury building provided for executives and high-profile residents, and I knew from experience that their response time was under 2 minutes. You really think a fake press release scares me, Yvette? I asked, tilting my head and looking at her with pure, unadulterated pity. You think the board of directors at my company, who have watched me generate triple their revenue projections for the last 3 years, will fire me over a baseless cash grab initiated by my father's broke wife? You are vastly overestimating your own importance and drastically underestimating my legal team. Attorney Cross's smug expression faltered for a fraction of a second. He opened his mouth to deliver another barrage of legal threats, but he was cut off by the sharp, familiar chime of the private elevator opening directly into my hallway. Heavy, hurried footsteps echoed against the marble floor. 2 large uniformed security guards stepped out of the elevator cab, their expressions stern and strictly professional. They flanked Yvette and Attorney Cross, immediately cutting off any potential escape route. Miss Banks, the lead guard, said, addressing me respectfully. "Is there a problem here? We received your alert." "Yes, Marcus," I replied, keeping my eyes locked dead on Yvette. "These 2 individuals bypassed the concierge and are currently trespassing on my private floor. Please escort them off the premises immediately, and kindly ensure their faces are flagged at the front desk so they are never permitted inside this building again." Yvette gasped, her face turning a deep shade of crimson as the second guard stepped forward and firmly grabbed her by the elbow. "Get your hands off me!" she shrieked, trying to yank her arm away, but the guard held fast. "You are making a massive mistake, Keisha. You will pay for this." Attorney Cross, however, did not resist. He smoothed the lapels of his charcoal suit and calmly slid the manila envelope back into his leather briefcase. The confident, arrogant smirk returned to his face, slowly spreading from ear to ear as he looked at me over the security guard's shoulder. "You can throw us out, Miss Banks," he said, his voice echoing smoothly down the hallway, as the guards began to usher them toward the waiting elevator. "But you should probably read the full plaintiff list when I have you formally served at your office tomorrow. My client Yvette is not the only family member suing you for elder manipulation." I stood perfectly still in my doorway, the cool air conditioning of my loft suddenly feeling freezing against my skin. He stepped into the elevator, turning around to face me as the brass doors began to slide shut. "Your father might not have had the stomach to put his name on the lawsuit," Cross called out, just as the gap narrowed. "But your sister Tanisha was more than happy to sign on the dotted line." The heavy brass doors of my private elevator slid shut with a definitive metallic thud, cutting off the sight of Yvette, struggling against the security guard's firm grip. Her shrill protests were instantly silenced, leaving my foyer echoing with a profound, sudden quiet. I stood perfectly still for a long moment, listening to the hum of the central air conditioning and the distant, faint sounds of downtown Atlanta traffic filtering through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The immediate adrenaline rush of the confrontation began to recede, leaving behind a cold, sharp, and entirely focused anger. I turned my attention to the entryway console table. Attorney Lawrence Cross had not taken his demand letter with him. In his final arrogant gesture before stepping into the elevator cab, he had smoothly dropped the thick manila envelope onto the polished marble surface of the table. It sat there like a venomous snake coiled and waiting to strike. I hated the sight of it. I hated what it represented. But Grandpa Elijah had always taught me to look my enemies directly in the eye and read every single line of a contract before deciding how to destroy it. I walked over to the console and picked up the envelope. It was heavy, packed with dozens of pages of aggressive legal posturing and fabricated claims. I pulled the stack of crisp white paper out and leaned against the edge of the table. I skipped right past the boilerplate language, the standard intimidation tactics, and the initial summaries outlining their ridiculous narrative of elder abuse. I did not care about the creative writing exercise Cross had put together to justify stealing my inheritance. I only cared about the hard facts. I wanted to see exactly who was declaring war on me. I flipped directly to the back of the packet, searching for the sworn plaintiff declarations and the signature pages. My eyes scanned the black ink, searching for the one name I fully expected to see. I looked for Reginald Banks. I searched the entire page, checking the secondary addendums and the witness lists. My father's signature was absolutely nowhere to be found. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped my throat, echoing loudly in the empty foyer. It was so perfectly, entirely on brand for him. Reginald Banks was a man who desperately wanted the $45 million prize, but he was far too much of a coward to actually put his name on the weapon used to steal it. He wanted to fund his failing printing business and buy his way back into Atlanta's high society, but he refused to be legally recorded, claiming his own father had lost his mind. He was hiding safely in the shadows, letting his desperate new wife take the public risk so he could keep his hands ostensibly clean. He wanted the spoils of war without ever stepping onto the battlefield. But as my eyes moved down the thick, textured paper, I saw that Yvette was not the only one willing to do his dirty work. There, resting on the line designated for the secondary plaintiff, was a signature I would recognize anywhere. It was large, looping, and incredibly vain, taking up twice as much space as necessary. Tanisha. My younger sister had officially signed her name to a document claiming our beloved grandfather was mentally incapacitated. Tanisha, the golden child. The sister who had never worked a single grueling late-night shift, who had never missed a summer vacation to the Amalfi Coast, who had her entire life bankrolled by a father who could not afford to spoil her, but did it anyway. She had signed a lawsuit against me. I traced the blue ink of her signature with my gaze, feeling a deep, profound sense of disgust. I remembered how Grandpa Elijah used to try and teach Tanisha about the value of $1. He would offer to pay her for helping out at the shipping yard office during summer breaks, hoping to instill some sense of work ethic in her. Tanisha would just roll her eyes, complain about the heat ruining her hair, and call our father to come pick her up. She viewed Elijah's shipping empire as a dirty blue-collar embarrassment right up until the exact moment she realized it was worth $45 million. Now she wanted it. She wanted the money to fund her endless shopping sprees and her massive Buckhead mansion, and she was perfectly willing to drag our grandfather's brilliant legacy through the mud to get it. I gripped the edges of the legal packet tightly, crumpling the paper slightly under my fingers. It was a massive betrayal, but it was also a reckless move. High-profile asset litigation of this magnitude is incredibly expensive. You do not just hire a cutthroat shark like Lawrence Cross on a whim. Cross was the kind of high-powered asset litigator who did not even answer his phone for less than a $100,000 initial retainer. He certainly did not work on contingency for a desperate housewife with maxed-out credit cards and a spoiled sister living off a dwindling allowance. Someone was backing this lawsuit, someone with access to significant liquid capital and a profound misunderstanding of who they were messing with. I quickly flipped past the signature pages, digging deeper into the thick stack of legal filings. Lawsuits involving massive trusts, require transparency regarding the financial guarantors, especially when filing emergency injunctions to freeze assets. I bypassed the standard non-disclosure agreements and the court filing fee receipts searching for the financial disclosure section. When I reached the final appendix, my eyes locked onto a separate corporate letterhead securely stapled to the back of the packet. It was a formal declaration of financial backing, guaranteeing the total coverage of all legal fees, court costs, and potential countersuit damages incurred by Yvette and Tanisha. I read the name of the guarantor and the air completely left my lungs. It was not a personal bank account. It was a corporate entity. The primary financial backer funding this entire malicious lawsuit was a venture capital firm. Specifically, it was Gallagher Strategic Ventures. Preston. My white brother-in-law, Tanisha's incredibly smug and condescending husband, had legally attached his entire venture capital firm as the primary financial engine of this war. He was the one paying Lawrence Cross. He was the one fronting the massive retainer. Preston Gallagher, the man who constantly talked down to me at family dinners using hollow corporate jargon to mask his own staggering incompetence, was bankrolling the attempt to steal Black generational wealth. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying clarity. This was never just about Yvette's designer debts or Tanisha's spoiled entitlement. This was a calculated corporate strike. Preston's venture capital firm was failing. I knew from basic industry whispers that he had mismanaged his investors' funds backing terrible tech startups that crashed and burned. He was facing massive liquidity defaults. His institutional investors were likely breathing down his neck demanding returns he simply did not have. Preston was backed into a corner staring at total financial ruin and federal scrutiny. He looked at my family and saw a lifeline. He looked at Grandpa Elijah's $45 million shipping trust and saw the perfect unregulated capital injection to save his sinking ship. He had manipulated Yvette's desperation and Tanisha's jealousy, convincing them to file this lawsuit so he could manage the settlement funds and secretly funnel the money straight into his failing business accounts. He was playing them like absolute fools and using them as human shields to get to my money. I lowered the document, tapping the thick stack of paper thoughtfully against the marble console table. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. Preston thought he was the smartest person in the room. He thought he could easily outmaneuver a Black woman in the corporate arena because he assumed I was just a creative director who only understood color palettes and marketing campaigns. He thought I was an easy target. He had no idea that Grandpa Elijah had taught me how to read a balance sheet before I learned how to drive. He had no idea that I had built my own network of forensic accountants, corporate lawyers, and media strategists. Preston Gallagher had just tied his entire failing corporate entity to a fraudulent lawsuit against me. He had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy him completely. I was not just going to defend my inheritance, I was going to systematically dismantle his entire firm. The drive from my loft to the financial district took less than 15 minutes, but my mind was operating light years ahead. I navigated the heavy Atlanta traffic with mechanical precision, my grip on the steering wheel, the only physical indicator of the absolute rage coursing through my veins. Preston Gallagher had made a fatal miscalculation. He thought hiding behind a wall of legal jargon and his wife's signature would protect him. He thought he could pull the strings from the safety of his sleek venture capital firm, treating my family's legacy like a distressed asset, ripe for a hostile takeover. He was a man who had been handed every advantage in life and still managed to fail upward, failing so spectacularly that he now needed to steal from a deceased Black man just to maintain his country club memberships. I pulled my premium sedan into the underground parking garage of the towering glass monolith that housed Gallagher Strategic Ventures. I bypassed the visitor parking entirely and slid my car directly into a spot marked exclusively for executive partners. If Preston wanted to act like he owned my family, I was going to treat his corporate territory with the exact same level of blatant disrespect. I rode the elevator up to the 40th floor. When the polished steel doors parted, I stepped into a reception area that screamed of forced modern luxury. The walls were clad in imported Italian marble, and the company logo was etched in frosted glass behind a massive minimalist reception desk. It was an intimidating space designed specifically to make visitors feel small and financially inadequate. It had the absolute opposite effect on me. I saw it for exactly what it was: a beautiful, highly expensive facade, hiding a crumbling, unstable foundation. "Can I help you?" Ma'am, the young receptionist asked, her voice pitching up nervously as I marched directly past her desk without breaking my stride. "You cannot go back there." I ignored her completely. My eyes were locked on the massive glass-walled conference room at the end of the main corridor. The transparent walls were meant to promote an image of corporate transparency, but right now they just provided a perfect view of two people plotting a theft. Preston and my sister Tanisha were sitting at a long, custom oak table. Tanisha was casually scrolling through her phone, a delicate porcelain espresso cup resting near her perfectly manicured hand. She was wearing a vibrant silk blouse that likely cost more than a starting teacher's annual salary, looking utterly unbothered by the fact that she had just signed a document attempting to declare our grandfather incompetent. Preston sat across from her, leaning back in his ergonomic leather chair. He had his suit jacket off, his sleeves rolled up to the elbows, projecting an image of the hard-working casual genius. I pushed the heavy glass door open with enough force that it slammed against the rubber wall stopper with a sharp, violent crack. The sound shattered the quiet murmur of the office. Tanisha jumped, spilling a few drops of dark espresso onto the pristine white table. Preston immediately stood up, his chair rolling backward. His expression shifted from relaxed arrogance to irritated surprise, but he quickly masked it with the patronizing calm of a man who believed he held all the cards. "Keisha," he said, smoothing his tie and offering a tight, utterly fake smile. "We were not expecting you, though I suppose I should have anticipated you would want to discuss the terms of the restructuring sooner rather than later. Please have a seat. Let us approach this rationally." I did not sit. I walked slowly around the edge of the long table, stopping just behind Tanisha's chair. My sister refused to look up at me, suddenly finding her glowing phone screen absolutely fascinating. "There is nothing to discuss, Preston," I stated, my voice echoing coldly against the glass walls. "And there certainly will not be any restructuring. I am here to look you in the eye and tell you that your little corporate raiding party ends today." Preston let out a breathy, condescending chuckle. He leaned his hands flat on the oak table, assuming a posture he probably used to intimidate nervous startup founders. "Keisha, I understand you are emotional right now. You are taking this entirely too personally. This is simply a matter of proper wealth management. Family assets must serve the collective legacy, not just the whims of one individual." Elijah was a great man, but his financial structures were antiquated. He did not understand the complexities of modern capital deployment. "We are simply modernizing the estate to ensure long-term generational stability." I stared at him, letting his hollow corporate jargon hang in the rigid air. It was a spectacular performance. He was actually trying to gaslight me into believing that stealing $45 million was an act of benevolent financial stewardship. He was casting himself as the brilliant corporate savior, stepping in to rescue the disorganized Banks family from our own supposed financial ignorance. Generational stability. I repeated, letting the words drip with pure venom. "You have a lot of nerve using that phrase in front of me, Preston. You do not care about the Banks family legacy. You do not care about my grandfather's blood, sweat, and tears. You care about the fact that your latest round of tech investments just tanked, and your institutional backers are demanding to see liquidity that you do not possess." Preston's eyes narrowed slightly, a microscopic twitch in his jaw betraying his carefully maintained composure. "I see you have been reading some baseless industry gossip," he countered, his tone dropping an octave. "My firm is performing exceptionally well. We are simply diversifying our portfolio. The shipping trust requires aggressive management to maximize yields. It is frankly irresponsible to leave that much capital sitting stagnant under the control of someone with zero venture experience." Tanisha finally looked up from her phone, emboldened by her husband's arrogant posturing. "You need to stop being so greedy, Keisha," she snapped, her voice whining and petulant. "Daddy and Yvette deserve their fair share, and Preston knows how to make the money grow. He went to business school. You just draw packaging for moisturizer. You are just mad because you cannot control everything anymore. You always want to be the boss of the family. Just sign the papers so we can all move on. I have a contractor waiting to remodel the pool house, and I need my portion released this month. My interior designer says we need the funds secured by Friday. I looked down at my sister, feeling a profound wave of disgust wash over me. She was so hopelessly blind to the reality of the situation. She actually believed Preston was fighting this legal battle so she could remodel a pool house. She had no idea that her husband was planning to swallow the entire estate whole to cover his own catastrophic failures. Your portion, I asked, tilting my head at Tanisha. You think Preston is going to hand you a check, Tanisha? You think this lawsuit is about getting you and Daddy a new allowance? You think your husband is fighting this battle out of the goodness of his heart so you can pick out imported Italian tiles for a pool house? I turned my attention back to Preston, watching the sweat begin to form at his temples. Tell her, Preston. Tell your wife exactly what happens to capital when it gets absorbed into a failing venture fund. Tell her about the liquidity lockups and the management fees you plan to extract before she ever sees a single dime. Tell her that her inheritance is going straight to your angry investors. Preston stood up straight, abandoning his relaxed posture. He pointed a finger at me, his face flushing bright red. You are way out of your depth, Keisha. You run a beauty brand, you sell lipstick and lotion. You have absolutely no idea how high-level finance operates. I have the legal backing, I have the filings, and I have the support of the actual biological heirs to this estate. You are going to sign the restructuring agreement, or I am going to let Lawrence Cross publicly destroy your career. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him, resting my own hands on the table. You think selling lipstick means I do not know how to read a balance sheet? I asked, my voice a low, dangerous hum. You think because I am a black woman in the creative industry, I cannot see a predatory corporate raid when it is staring me right in the face? You attached Gallagher Strategic Ventures as the primary financial guarantor for this lawsuit, Preston. You tied your entire firm to a fraudulent claim of elder abuse. Preston smirked, crossing his arms over his chest. Yes, I did, because I have the capital to fund this war indefinitely. I can keep you tied up in litigation for the next decade. I smiled back at him, a cold, razor-sharp expression that made his smirk falter. No, Preston, I replied, leaning in closer. You did it because you are desperate. You are bleeding cash, and you need a massive unregulated asset to save your company from federal insolvency. But you made a critical error. By formally attaching your firm to this lawsuit, you just gave me the legal right to demand a full discovery of your company's financials to prove you actually have the capital to back the claim. The color drained completely from Preston's face. Tanisha looked at her husband, expecting him to fire back with more aggressive legal threats or his usual patronizing corporate buzzwords. When he remained entirely silent, his jaw locked tight and his eyes darting frantically toward the glass walls of the conference room, she realized he had no counterattack. The silence stretched out thick and suffocating until Tanisha simply could not handle the massive, sudden shift in power. If her husband was not going to put me in my place, she was going to do it herself. She slammed her phone face down onto the oak table and stood up, pushing her heavy chair back with a harsh, loud scrape. You are completely bluffing, Tanisha shouted, her voice rising to a shrill, piercing pitch that made several employees in the outer hallway turn their heads in alarm. You are just a pathetic, jealous liar, Keisha. You have always been insanely jealous of me and the life I built. She rounded the table, her expensive silk blouse rustling aggressively as she marched toward me. Tanisha's face contorted, not with the poised elegance she meticulously displayed on her social media accounts, but with a raw, ugly envy she had harbored since childhood. She pointed a rigid French manicured finger directly at my chest. Look at you. You are 32 years old and you have absolutely nothing outside of that stupid corporate office you practically sleep in. You are a plain, ungrateful spinster who could not secure a husband or build a real family of your own, so you decided to steal mine. You realized you were going to die completely alone, so you sank your claws into a dying old man. You spent your evenings hovering around a sterile hospital bed, manipulating his medication and twisting his fading memories until he did not even know his own name. You brainwashed him into disinheriting his own flesh and blood because you are a sick, bitter woman who desperately wants to control everything. I let her finish her little rehearsed monologue. I let the venom spill out of her mouth until she was breathing heavily, her chest heaving with exertion. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match her hysterical, panicked tone. True power never has to shout to make itself heard in a room full of cowards. "Are you quite finished, Tanisha?" I asked, keeping my tone as cold and hard as a cut diamond. Because if we are going to stand in a glass-walled office and throw around loud accusations about who is pathetic, we need to talk about harsh reality. You love to call me a spinster because I chose to build my own executive empire instead of marrying the first man with a country club membership and an imported car. I pay my own mortgage. I buy my own assets. Your entire existence is a carefully curated mirage. I stepped closer, forcing her to hold my unyielding gaze. Every luxury vacation you take, every limited edition designer bag you carry, every catered dinner party you throw is funded by Daddy's desperate financial handouts and Preston's supposedly booming business. But take a really good look at your husband right now, Tanisha. Turn around and look at the man who is supposed to be your ultimate financial savior. Tanisha hesitated, but she slowly turned her head to look back at Preston. He had not moved a single inch. He was gripping the edge of his ergonomic leather chair so tightly, his knuckles were stark white against the dark material. The arrogant swagger of a high-powered venture capitalist had vanished completely, replaced by the hollow terror of a man who realized his massive bluff had just been called by someone holding a royal flush. "He is absolutely terrified," I said, my voice carrying clearly and crisply across the silent room. "He is paralyzed because he knows I am telling the absolute truth. By legally attaching Gallagher Strategic Ventures as the primary guarantor of this frivolous lawsuit, he just handed my legal team the master key to his entire corporate operation. During the discovery phase, we are going to subpoena every single bank statement, every offshore wire transfer, and every falsified investor prospectus he has touched for the past 5 years. He knows we are going to find out that his firm is completely empty. He is drowning in bad debt and institutional lawsuits. He aggressively pushed you and Yvette to file this ridiculous claim because stealing Grandpa Elijah's $45 million was his only desperate plan to avoid a federal prison sentence." "Preston, tell her she is crazy!" Tanisha shrieked, her voice trembling with absolute panic as her eyes darted wildly between us. "Tell her we have the money. Tell her the firm is fine and you are going to ruin her." Preston opened his mouth, but his throat worked silently. He looked away toward the floor, unable to maintain eye contact with his own panicked wife. "He cannot speak because he is a coward," I stated relentlessly, driving the final nail into the coffin of her perfect life. "You signed a legal document claiming Grandpa Elijah was mentally incapacitated. You swore on paper that he was out of his mind and easily manipulated. But Grandpa was sharper on his worst day in hospice care than your husband has ever been in his entire life." I stepped right into Tanisha's personal space, invading the bubble of fake luxury she hid behind. "Grandpa Elijah saw right through Preston the very first day you brought him to the house for Sunday dinner. Do you remember that afternoon? Preston was out on the patio smoking a cheap cigar and bragging loudly about his massive tech acquisitions. Grandpa pulled me aside in the kitchen and told me exactly what your husband was. He said Preston was a hollow, empty suit with a weak handshake and a significantly weaker business plan. He told me Preston had the desperate, sweaty energy of a parasite looking for a host to drain. Grandpa knew Preston was a total fraud from day one. That is exactly why he explicitly structured his legal trust to make absolutely sure your husband could never touch a single dime of the bank's family wealth. He was protecting our legacy from your massive mistake." The absolute truth hit Tanisha with the undeniable force of a freight train. The fragile illusion of her superior social standing, her perfect wealthy marriage, and her elevated status above me shattered into a million jagged pieces. The realization that our grandfather, the self-made patriarch she had always looked down upon for his blue-collar roots, had completely seen through her husband's facade was too much for her fragile ego to bear. Her face twisted into a mask of pure feral fury. She let out a guttural scream that tore roughly through her throat. She spun around and violently swept her right arm across the length of the massive oak conference table. Her hand slammed hard into the delicate porcelain espresso cup and the heavy crystal water pitcher resting near the center. The objects launched off the polished wood and crashed violently onto the concrete floor. The crystal shattered with a deafening explosive crack, sending sharp, jagged shards rocketing in every direction. Dark espresso and ice water splashed heavily against the transparent glass walls and puddled rapidly around Tanisha's designer heels. The sudden violent noise brought the entire office to a dead, terrifying standstill. Outside the conference room, dozens of employees froze. They stood up from their sleek, modern desks, staring through the transparent glass walls with wide, horrified eyes. They were watching the immaculate, wealthy wife of their CEO throw a violent, screaming temper tantrum in the middle of a normal workday. Preston physically recoiled from the shattering glass, pressing his back flat against the wall like a cornered rat. He raised his hands in a weak, pathetic gesture, trying to calm his hysterical wife. But he lacked the courage to actually step forward and intervene. I did not flinch. I did not move a single muscle to avoid the flying glass or the splashing water. I stood perfectly still, a pillar of absolute calm, amidst her pathetic, chaotic storm. I looked down at the ruined crystal and the spreading puddle of dark liquid before slowly raising my eyes to meet Tanisha's wild, panicked gaze. "You can break every piece of glass in this entire corporate building, Tanisha," I said, my voice dropping to a chilling, authoritative whisper that commanded the silent room. "It will not change the reality that you have just signed your own financial death warrant. Tomorrow morning, my legal team is filing an emergency motion for full financial discovery on Gallagher Strategic Ventures. You wanted to drag me into a public courtroom to steal my money. Now I am going to use that exact same courtroom to expose your husband's massive fraud to the federal government and burn your entire fake life to the ground." I reached into my structured leather tote bag and pulled out my sleek silver tablet. I tapped the screen to wake it up and slid it smoothly across the polished oak table. It glided over the smooth wood and came to a dead stop right at the edge of the dark espresso puddle, resting directly in front of Preston. "Take a good look," I instructed him, my voice completely devoid of sympathy. I did not even need a subpoena to find that information. Do you know how easy it is to track the catastrophic failure of a venture capital firm when the institutional investors start quietly panicking? You thought you were operating in the shadows, but your desperation left a massive paper trail. Preston stared down at the glowing screen. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. The document displayed on the tablet was a compilation of public financial filings, interwoven with forensic accounting summaries that my team had pulled together in less than 48 hours. It outlined a devastating timeline of his recent business activities. "You are facing massive liquidity defaults, Preston." I continued pacing slowly behind Tanisha's chair like a predator circling its prey. "You overleveraged your firm backing 3 different tech startups that entirely collapsed before their Series B funding rounds. Your institutional backers, the people who actually trusted you with their millions, are executing their capital calls. They want their money back, and you do not have it. You have been shuffling funds between shell companies trying to plug the holes in a sinking ship, but the water is rising too fast. You need a massive cash injection immediately. You need $45 million to pay off those furious investors before the Securities and Exchange Commission formally opens an investigation into your firm and hits you with a federal indictment." Preston did not say a single word. He could not even lift his eyes from the glowing screen. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths. The truth was staring him right in the face, exposing him as the absolute fraud Grandpa Elijah always knew he was. Tanisha looked at her husband, her pristine features twisted in confusion. "Preston," she demanded, her voice tight with panic. "What is she talking about? Tell her she is lying. Tell her our money is fine." When Preston remained frozen in a state of absolute terror, Tanisha finally grabbed the tablet herself. She stared at the complex spreadsheets, the highlighted negative balances, and the highlighted warnings of imminent default. She clearly did not understand the intricate financial mechanics detailed on the screen, but she perfectly understood the word federal indictment. She threw the tablet back onto the table as if it had physically burned her. She scrambled backward in her chair, distancing herself from the evidence of her husband's failure. But Tanisha was not a woman who knew how to accept defeat gracefully. Instead of facing reality, she immediately shifted her terror into pure, unfiltered malice. "You think you are so smart, Keisha," she hissed, her voice vibrating with a vicious, frantic energy. "You think a bunch of stupid spreadsheets are going to stop us. You think you can just walk in here and ruin my life. I will destroy you long before you ever get a chance to file a single piece of paper in court." I stopped pacing and looked down at my sister. "And how exactly do you plan to do that, Tanisha?" "I will destroy you in the press," she snarled, her eyes wide and unhinged. "You care so much about your precious beauty brand and your flawless corporate reputation. I have friends at every major publication in this city. I sit on charity boards with the most powerful media executives in the Southeast. I will tell everyone exactly who you really are. I will paint you as a cold, calculated monster who isolated a sick old man and manipulated him into cutting off his own biological family. I will tell the world that you are a thief and an abuser. By the time I am finished with you, your investors will pull out of your company, your customers will boycott your products, and you will be completely toxic. I will ruin your name forever." I listened to her desperate threats, feeling a strange sense of absolute clarity. Tanisha had finally shown her true colors. She was no longer hiding behind fake concern for our grandfather or pretending to care about the family legacy. She was just a spoiled, cornered child throwing a tantrum because someone had finally told her no. "You can try, Tanisha," I replied, my voice perfectly level, "but unlike you, I actually built my reputation on hard work and integrity. You have nothing but a failing marriage and a husband who is about to face federal prison. Go ahead and call your friends in the press. Tell them whatever lies you want. But remember that discovery works both ways. The minute you take this public, I will release every single document on that tablet to the media. I will let the entire world see exactly why you are so desperate for a bailout." I reached across the table, picked up my tablet, and slipped it back into my tote bag. I turned my back on both of them, dismissing their entire existence. I walked toward the heavy glass door, my heels clicking with measured, steady authority against the concrete floor. "You are going to regret this," Tanisha screamed after me, her voice cracking with hysterical rage. "You are going to lose everything." I pushed the glass door open and stepped out into the main corridor. The entire office was still frozen, the employees staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. I did not acknowledge them. I walked straight down the hallway, my posture immaculate, my head held high. I felt a profound sense of liberation. The battle lines had been clearly drawn, and I knew exactly what I was dealing with. I had called their massive bluff and watched their entire strategy crumble in real time. I reached the executive elevator bank and pressed the call button. The polished steel doors slid open immediately, and I stepped inside. The heavy doors closed, sealing out the toxic, frantic energy of Gallagher Strategic Ventures. I took a deep breath, savoring the quiet hum of the descending elevator. I had won this round. I had exposed their lies and established my absolute dominance in this fight. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the ground floor. The doors parted, revealing the sprawling, sunlit expanse of the building's main lobby. The space was filled with the usual morning rush of corporate executives and administrative staff moving purposefully across the polished marble floors. I adjusted the strap of my tote bag on my shoulder, ready to walk out into the bright Atlanta morning and begin dismantling Preston's firm piece by piece. I had barely taken 3 steps into the bustling lobby when my cell phone began to vibrate violently inside my bag. I paused near a large structural pillar and pulled the phone out. The caller ID flashed brightly on the screen. It was Chloe, my executive assistant and head of public relations for my company. Chloe never called me on my personal line before 10 in the morning, unless it was an absolute critical emergency. I swiped the screen to answer. Chloe, what is wrong? Keisha, you need to sit down, Chloe said, her voice tight and breathless with unmistakable panic. It is bad. It is really, really bad. What are you talking about? I asked, my grip tightening instinctively around the phone. Speak clearly, Chloe. What is happening? It is a coordinated leak, she explained, her words rushing out in a terrified torrent. A massive PR leak just hit every major business blog and local news site in Atlanta about 5 minutes ago. It is spreading across social media like wildfire. Someone released a highly manipulated package of documents and anonymous statements to the press. I felt a cold, heavy knot form in the pit of my stomach. The confident victory I had felt just moments ago suddenly vanished, replaced by a sharp, chilling sense of impending disaster. What exactly are they saying, Chloe? They are framing you, Keisha, she said, her voice trembling. The articles are completely vicious. They are claiming you systematically isolated your grandfather during his final months and illegally altered his trust documents to steal the entire $45 million shipping empire. They have fabricated witness quotes from supposed nurses and legal aides claiming you engaged in severe psychological abuse. They are painting you as a ruthless, manipulative thief who stole her own family's generational wealth. Keisha, the narrative is already entirely out of control. Our company investors are already calling the office demanding answers. You are being completely destroyed in the press. I stood frozen in the middle of the crowded corporate lobby, the bright morning sunlight suddenly feeling harsh and unforgiving. Tanisha had not just been making idle threats in that glass-walled conference room. She and Preston had already pulled the trigger. They knew their legal case was weak and their financial situation was catastrophic, so they had launched a preemptive scorched earth media campaign to destroy my public credibility before I could ever expose their fraud. They were trying to burn me alive in the court of public opinion. I lowered the phone slowly, staring blindly at the polished marble floor as the absolute reality of their betrayal set in. The real war had just begun. The drive from Preston's towering glass monolith to my own corporate headquarters was a masterclass in emotional compartmentalization. I did not panic. I did not cry. I did not pull over to the side of the road and hyperventilate over the vicious, fabricated headlines currently destroying my name across the internet. Tanisha and Preston had pushed the nuclear button in a desperate, sloppy attempt to force me into a quick settlement. By leaking a heavily manipulated story to the Atlanta business blogs, they aimed to tank my professional reputation and make me radioactive. They wanted me to surrender my grandfather's $45 million shipping empire simply to make the bad press disappear. It was a classic intimidation tactic used by cornered cowards. It was also an incredibly fatal mistake. I pulled my car into the secured parking lot of my company headquarters. My beauty brand was housed in a massive, revitalized industrial brick building in West Midtown. It was a space I had purchased, gutted, and completely renovated using my own hard-earned capital. The stark contrast between my thriving, dynamic workspace and Preston's sterile, crumbling corporate facade was undeniable. I walked through the heavy double doors and was immediately hit by the vibrant, pulsing energy of my team. There was no panicked whispering in the hallways. There were no terrified employees hiding in their cubicles worried about the company's solvency. My staff was moving with absolute relentless purpose. Chloe was waiting for me the second I stepped off the main elevator. She fell into step beside me, handing me a thick printed dossier containing the full extent of the media leak. The headlines were spectacularly vicious, calling me a rogue heiress and a manipulative corporate opportunist. They quoted anonymous sources close to the family who claimed I had deliberately isolated Grandpa Elijah during his final days, restricting his visitors so I could rewrite his estate plans in my favor. They painted a picture of a cold, calculated spinster who stole her own family's generational wealth out of pure spite. We are getting flooded with calls from our primary retail partners, Chloe said, matching my rapid stride as we headed straight toward the executive suites. They are asking for an official statement regarding the elder abuse allegations. Our corporate social media accounts are being hammered by a coordinated bot attack pushing the narrative. They are trying to tank our upcoming product launch. Do not issue any defensive statements. I instructed her, my voice crisp and entirely devoid of fear. Do not apologize and do not try to explain my complicated family dynamics to a bunch of gossip blogs. Draft a single aggressive press release stating that the claims are entirely fabricated and that we will be pursuing immediate devastating litigation for defamation against all participating outlets. Let them know we are not playing games and we are not backing down. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors to the main boardroom. Marcus Sterling, the CEO of my brand and my most trusted business partner, was already sitting at the head of the long, reclaimed wood table. Marcus was a seasoned, brilliant industry veteran who had seen every dirty trick in the corporate playbook. He had his tablet propped open in front of him, scrolling through the exact same garbage articles Chloe had just handed me. He did not look worried. He looked ready for a fight. I sat down across from him, tossing my bag onto an empty chair. I assume you have seen the morning news, Marcus, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Marcus looked up and offered a calm, razor-sharp smile. I have read the absolute fiction your sister and her husband paid a crisis firm to write. Yes, he replied, taking a slow, deliberate sip of his black coffee. The PR hit is highly coordinated and very expensive. They pushed this out to multiple outlets simultaneously to maximize the shock value. They want you to panic, Keisha. They want you to hide under your desk and beg for a settlement. They are going to be severely disappointed, I stated, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the hardwood table. Are our investors concerned about the optics? Not the ones who actually matter, Marcus answered, sliding his tablet aside. I spent the last 30 minutes on the phone with our primary stakeholders. I reminded them that you took this brand from a kitchen table concept to a national retail powerhouse in under 5 years. I reminded them that your profit margins are absolutely flawless, and your visionary leadership is the exact reason they are seeing massive quarterly returns. I told them this is a frivolous family shakedown, and they need to stand down and let you handle it. They are fully backing you, Keisha. We have your back completely. A profound grounding sense of vindication settled over me. This was the distinct, unbridgeable difference between my world and the world my father and Tanisha lived in. My family relied entirely on unearned handouts, inherited titles, and empty social posturing. Daddy funded Tanisha's lavish, luxurious lifestyle without ever requiring her to work a single day of her life. Preston masked his catastrophic financial incompetence behind a shiny business degree and inherited country club connections. They expected blind loyalty based simply on bloodline and social status. I had built my empire differently. I had spent countless nights sleeping under my desk, designing product packaging and negotiating brutal supply chain contracts when no one else believed in my vision. I had built my vast network through shared trenches and undeniable competence. Marcus was not defending me out of blind family obligation or a desire to protect a fragile male ego. He was defending me because I had proven my worth 1,000 times over through hard, measurable work. I had secured brilliant, powerful allies who deeply respected my business acumen, not people who merely tolerated me for a monthly allowance. We are not playing defense, Marcus, I said, opening my own laptop and connecting it to the boardroom monitor. Tanisha and Preston want a war. I'm going to give them an absolute massacre. Preston Gallagher legally attached his entire venture capital firm as the financial guarantor for their fraudulent lawsuit. He did it because his firm is completely failing, and he desperately needs Grandpa Elijah's $45 million to pay off his furious institutional investors before he faces a federal indictment for fraud. Marcus raised his eyebrows, a sharp, predatory glint appearing in his dark eyes. He used his corporate entity to guarantee a fraudulent personal family lawsuit. He is incredibly desperate and blindingly arrogant, I confirmed, pulling up the initial public filings I had already gathered on his firm. And I am going to use that exact arrogance to dismantle him brick by brick. I need you to contact Sterling and Vance right now. Sterling and Vance was the most ruthless, highly effective forensic auditing firm in the Southeast. They did not just review financial statements, they performed complete surgical autopsies on corporate entities. They were the exact people you hired when you wanted to find every single skeleton buried deep in a company's financial closet. Tell them I want a full-scale forensic strike on Gallagher Strategic Ventures, I instructed Marcus, my voice echoing with absolute authority in the quiet boardroom. I want them to tear Preston's entire firm down to the absolute studs. I want them to find every hidden shell company, every falsified investor prospectus, and every panicked, desperate email he has sent to his creditors over the last 36 months. I want them to trace exactly how much money he has lost and exactly who he owes it to. Marcus picked up his phone, dialing the number without a single second of hesitation. Consider it done, he said, his voice hard and focused. They will have a team of senior forensic analysts on this before lunch. We will legally bury him in his own paperwork. I turned to Chloe, who was standing rigidly by the door, furiously typing my directives into her tablet. Chloe, contact our legal team and tell them to file the emergency motion for financial discovery against Preston's firm immediately. I want the federal subpoenas served directly to his corporate office by the end of the business day. Let Preston Gallagher explain to his terrified employees why federal marshals are walking through his pristine glass doors to seize his company hard drives. I closed my laptop with a definitive sharp snap. Tanisha thought she could break me by throwing a screaming tantrum and calling the local tabloids. She thought a few nasty articles would make me surrender my grandfather's legacy, just to avoid a little public embarrassment. She vastly underestimated the woman she was dealing with. I was not going to hide in my office and cry over a fabricated news story. I was going to use the exact weapon Preston had foolishly handed me to publicly expose his massive fraud and ensure that he never worked in the financial sector ever again. They had drawn first blood in the press, but I was going to deliver the final lethal strike in the courtroom. I bypassed the crowded coffee kiosks and the morning networking chatter in the lobby. My expression gave nothing away. Inside my chest, a fire was raging, but on the outside, I was absolute ice. I walked straight back to the private executive elevators and hit the button for the top floor. When the steel doors opened, I stepped out and marched directly back into the boardroom. Chloe was pacing the length of the room, 2 different cell phones in her hands, her eyes wide with mounting panic. She was firing off holding statements to our retail partners trying to plug the dam. Marcus was exactly where I left him, leaning back in his chair, though his demeanor had shifted from relaxed confidence to predatory focus. The massive digital monitor mounted on the far wall of the boardroom was already lit up, displaying a secure video conferencing grid. The lead forensic auditor from Sterling and Vance, a sharp-eyed man named David Sterling, was already on the screen. He had not waited for lunch to begin his surgical dissection of Gallagher Strategic Ventures. He had deployed his team the very second Marcus made the call. I sat down at the head of the long reclaimed wood table and folded my hands. I did not ask about the PR leak. I did not care what lies Tanisha and Preston were feeding the local blogs. I only cared about the ammunition David had gathered. Talk to me, David, I said, my voice perfectly steady. Give me the weapon I need to stop this bleeding. David adjusted his glasses, leaning closer to his camera. He did not waste time with pleasantries. You were absolutely right about Preston Gallagher. He began, his voice echoing clearly through the boardroom speakers. The man is running a glorified Ponzi scheme. His liquidity defaults are staggering. But as we were tracing the capital pipelines feeding into his firm, we hit a highly irregular secondary flow of cash. We found a backdoor channel. I narrowed my eyes. What kind of channel? David shared his screen, replacing his video feed with a complex web of financial flowcharts. The red lines crisscrossed the screen, creating a dense map of unauthorized wire transfers. We started pulling the public filings and following the digital paper trail of the individuals attached to this lawsuit, David explained. We looked into your father, Reginald Banks, and his commercial printing business. His company ledgers are a complete disaster. But the real issue is not gross mismanagement. The real issue is aggressive, systematic embezzlement. I leaned forward, staring at the massive screen. My father was a terrible businessman, but he was not a thief. He was far too obsessed with his public image to ever risk stealing from his own company. Someone else was holding the pen. We dug into the accounts payable. David continued, his voice tight with professional disgust. Over the last 14 months, Reginald's printing business has been paying exorbitant monthly consulting fees to 3 separate corporate entities. They are registered as vendor accounts, but they provide absolutely zero tangible services. We ran the tax identification numbers. They are all anonymous shell companies registered in Delaware. Marcus sat up straight, his eyes locking onto the screen. Delaware is a notoriously opaque state for corporate registry. People use it when they want to hide who actually owns the company. Did you pierce the corporate veil, David? It took my team exactly 20 minutes, David replied, a hint of smug satisfaction in his tone. The shell companies are poorly disguised. They all trace back to a single primary beneficiary. The sole proprietor of all 3 Delaware LLCs is your father's new wife, Yvette Banks. The room went dead silent. Chloe stopped pacing, lowering both of her phones. I stared at the name highlighted in bright yellow on the boardroom monitor. Yvette. The puzzle pieces snapped together with a terrifying, brilliant clarity. The picture was entirely complete, and it was uglier than I could have ever imagined. Yvette had not pushed my father into this lawsuit just because she was greedy. She pushed him into it because she was fighting for her absolute survival. I knew Yvette's history. She was a woman who had spent her entire adult life orbiting the outer edges of Atlanta's high society, desperately trying to break into the inner circle. She draped herself in imported designer labels and frequented the most exclusive private clubs, projecting the image of a wealthy socialite. But her lifestyle was a complete fabrication built on a mountain of high-interest credit and empty promises. She owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to luxury boutiques in Buckhead. She had massive outstanding balances at exclusive country clubs and private social organizations. She was drowning in high society debt. When she met my father, she thought she had finally secured her golden ticket. Reginald Banks walked and talked like a multi-million-dollar patriarch. He wore bespoke suits and threw around our grandfather's legendary name at every society gala. Yvette married him believing she was stepping into a river of endless cash. It was only after the ink dried on the marriage certificate that she realized Reginald's pockets were incredibly shallow. His printing business was failing, and his allowance from Grandpa Elijah was strictly controlled. Yvette was trapped. She had creditors breathing down her neck and a lifestyle she could no longer afford to fake, so she started stealing. She set up the Delaware shell companies and began systematically siphoning money directly out of Reginald's failing business accounts. She was using his company as her own personal piggy bank, writing fraudulent invoices to pay off her luxury debts. She is committing federal wire fraud, I stated, the reality settling heavily over the boardroom. She is actively embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars across state lines. David nodded, his image reappearing on the monitor. Exactly. And Reginald's accountants are going to notice the massive cash deficit by the end of the fiscal quarter. When they do, the federal authorities will be immediately notified. Yvette is staring down the barrel of a 10 to 20-year federal prison sentence for grand larceny and wire fraud. I let out a slow, sharp breath. The $45 million trust. That is her life raft, Marcus said, his voice low and dangerous. She does not just want a new pool house or a shopping spree. She needs a massive, unregulated cash settlement from your grandfather's estate to quietly repay the money she stole from Reginald's company before the auditors find out. She needs your inheritance to cover up a felony. This entire lawsuit, this coordinated media leak, this sudden aggressive attack on my character, it was all a desperate, frantic scramble by 2 drowning people. Preston needed my money to pay off his furious institutional investors and avoid a federal indictment. Yvette needed my money to replace her embezzled funds and avoid a federal prison cell. They had teamed up, manipulating my weak father and my jealous sister, using them as human shields to launch a hostile takeover of Black generational wealth. They had rushed the PR leak, hoping I would panic and settle quietly to save my beauty brand's reputation. They thought the threat of public humiliation would force me to sign away my legacy. They completely misjudged the battlefield. They brought a tabloid smear campaign to a federal fraud war. Chloe, I called out, my voice ringing with absolute cold authority. Drop the holding statements. We are not playing defense anymore. I want you to draft a new press release immediately. You are going to announce that we are filing a massive countersuit against Gallagher Strategic Ventures and Yvette Banks for defamation, extortion, and attempted grand larceny. Chloe's eyes widened, but she instantly began typing. David, I said, turning my attention back to the massive monitor. I want those Delaware financial flowcharts fully verified and legally certified within the hour. I want every fraudulent vendor invoice Yvette wrote highlighted and attached to a formal legal brief. Marcus, call our corporate attorneys. Tell them to bypass the civil courts entirely. We are taking this information directly to the United States Attorney's Office. We are turning over all evidence of Yvette's wire fraud and Preston's liquidity defaults to the federal authorities. They wanted to use the press to paint me as a thief. I was going to use the United States federal government to prove they were the actual criminals. They had tried to bury me under a mountain of lies. I was going to bury them under an avalanche of undeniable financial truth. I stood up from the reclaimed wood table, feeling a surge of absolute, unstoppable power. The smear campaign was nothing but noise. I held the irrefutable evidence of their felonies in the palm of my hand. Yvette and Preston had dug their own graves. I was simply going to provide the dirt to fill them. My private office line rarely rang directly. Chloe screened everything that came through the main switchboard with ruthless efficiency. But the sharp, shrill trill of the heavy brass phone sitting on my desk cut right through the quiet satisfaction I was feeling after dismantling Yvette's financial house of cards in the boardroom. I did not need to guess who had bypassed the corporate filters. I glanced at the digital caller ID display glowing against the polished mahogany wood. Reginald Banks, my father. I let it ring 3 times. I wanted him to sweat in whatever manufactured crisis he was currently facing. I picked up the receiver on the 4th ring, pressing the cold plastic to my ear. Before I could even speak a single syllable, a frantic, high-pitched wail assaulted my eardrum. "Keisha, what have you done to me?" he screamed, his voice cracking with a pathetic, wet sob. "My accounts are frozen. All of them. The corporate operating funds, the payroll accounts, my personal checking. I just tried to pay the caterers for my celebration this weekend, and my black card was declined." "Declined, Keisha. The bank manager told me there is a federal hold on my entire financial portfolio. You destroyed my business credit." I sat back in my leather ergonomic chair, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the sprawling Atlanta skyline. Sterling and Vance had worked incredibly fast. The federal authorities had clearly seen enough in that initial data dump from the forensic auditors to put an immediate freeze on Reginald's printing business pending a full criminal investigation into Yvette's activities. "I did not destroy your credit, Dad," I replied, my tone completely flat and entirely devoid of sympathy. "Your new wife destroyed your credit. Yvette has been using your commercial printing company as a personal slush fund to pay off her luxury boutique debts and private country club dues through a series of anonymous Delaware shell companies. She committed federal wire fraud. The United States government froze your accounts, not me." "That is a vicious lie," he shouted, though the distinct waver in his voice told me he already suspected it was the absolute truth. "You are just trying to deflect because you are a greedy, selfish daughter. You unleashed those corporate vultures on your own blood. You are trying to ruin the bank's family name just to keep your grandfather's money all to yourself. You ruined the family name the minute you let your wife and Tanisha file a fraudulent lawsuit claiming I abused Grandpa Elijah." I fired back, refusing to let him control the narrative for a single second. "You sat back and watched them leak fabricated lies to the press this morning, painting me as a monster just so you could get your hands on a $45 million trust you did not earn and do not deserve. We needed that money, Keisha," he sobbed, his desperation overriding any shred of paternal dignity he had left. "The business has been struggling for years. Yvette has specific lifestyle expenses we have to maintain to keep our social standing. Tanisha and Preston are completely drowning in venture capital debt. We are your family. You were supposed to share the wealth. Elijah was an absolute fool to leave the entire shipping empire to you. You are a woman alone. You do not even have a husband to help you manage a trust of that massive size. You were supposed to sign the settlement and make this easy for all of us. The sheer audacity of his sexism and unearned entitlement was breathtaking. He genuinely believed that simply because I was a woman, I was incapable of managing the corporate empire I had already helped my grandfather double in value over the last 10 years. He believed my only valid purpose on this earth was to act as a silent financial donor for his fragile male ego and his wife's rampant shopping addiction. There will be no settlement, I stated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. There will be no quiet resolution. Yvette is going to federal prison, and Preston is going right down with her. You are going to lose everything because you chose a fake high society lifestyle over your own daughter. Reginald let out a harsh, frantic laugh. It was an ugly sound filled with cornered panic and misplaced arrogance. You think you hold all the winning cards? He sneered, his tears instantly drying up as he pivoted to his favorite tactic of intimidation. You think your little corporate lawyers can save you from total public ruin? You are going to sign that $45 million settlement, Keisha. You are going to sign it this weekend and you are going to beg us to take it. I gripped the smooth edge of my desk. What exactly are you talking about? The annual church and community gala, he announced, his voice dripping with triumphant malice. It is this Saturday night at the Piedmont Ballroom. I am receiving the Lifetime Leadership Award for my philanthropic contributions to the city. Every major business leader, politician, and media outlet in Atlanta will be sitting in that room. Yvette and Tanisha have already tipped off the press pool. They have prepared a massive statement. If you do not sign over the trust by Saturday evening, we are going to stand up on that stage and publicly denounce you. We will tell the entire congregation and the gathered press that you are under active criminal investigation for elder abuse. We will destroy your beauty brand, your professional reputation, and your life in front of the entire city. You will not be able to show your face in public ever again. He paused, breathing heavily into the receiver, waiting for me to beg. He expected me to cry, to panic, to ask for the legal paperwork so I could surrender my grandfather's legacy just to save my corporate face. He thought the threat of a massive public scandal at a prestigious community gala would force me to finally capitulate. I did not panic. I smiled. A cold, sharp, predatory smile that he could not see but would very soon feel. Is that the grand master plan, Dad? I asked, my voice eerily calm, ringing with absolute clarity. You are going to ambush me at your own award ceremony. It is the only way to make you listen and respect your elders, he declared clearly, believing he had already won the war. Tanisha is bringing the settlement papers directly to the gala. You will be sitting in the front row. You will sign them quietly before I take the stage, or we will end your career right there on the microphone. Do not test me, Keisha. You have until Saturday night. He slammed the phone down, ending the connection with a sharp, aggressive click. I sat in the profound silence of my office, the dial tone humming softly against my ear. Reginald Banks had just willingly handed me the exact coordinates of his own execution. He wanted a massive public spectacle. He wanted to use his prestigious Lifetime Leadership Award to shame me into submission. He was completely blind to the fact that his bank accounts were already frozen by federal authorities and that his entire fabricated world was about to violently collapse. He thought he was setting a brilliant trap for me, but he had just meticulously built his own gallows. I placed the receiver back onto the base with quiet precision. I pressed the intercom button on my console. Chloe, get Marcus and get back in here immediately. Within 60 seconds, both of them were standing inside my office. Marcus took one look at my face and crossed his arms over his chest. Who died? He asked dryly. No one yet, I replied, standing up and walking around to the front of my desk. But the Banks family is officially committing corporate suicide this Saturday night. My father just called in a panic. His accounts are completely frozen thanks to David's forensic strike. But instead of surrendering, he is doubling down on his delusion. He and Yvette are planning to publicly ambush me at the annual church and community gala. They are going to use the press pool at the event to announce their fabricated elder abuse claims, unless I sign the $45 million settlement right there at the dinner table. Chloe gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in shock. Keisha, that gala is massive. The mayor is going to be there. Half of our major retail partners buy tables at that specific event every single year. It will be an absolute media circus. I know, I said, my smile returning sharper and colder than before. That is exactly why we are going to let them set the stage. Reginald wants a captive audience. I am going to make sure he gets the performance of a lifetime. I turned to Marcus, my eyes locked onto his demanding absolute execution. I need you to call David Sterling back right now. I do not care how much overtime it costs, or how many analysts he has to pull off other accounts. I want the final verified forensic audit report, completed, printed, and legally bound, by Friday afternoon. I want the federal indictments for Yvette's wire fraud and Preston's financial crimes fast-tracked through the U.S. Attorney's Office. Marcus uncrossed his arms, a slow, terrifying grin spreading across his face as he realized exactly what I was planning. You want to serve them at the gala. I do not just want to serve them, I stated, walking toward the massive glass window looking down at the bustling city I had conquered on my own terms. I want to ruin them. I want our corporate legal team to finalize all the counter-filings for defamation, extortion, and grand larceny. Have our crisis PR firm draft a comprehensive press release detailing the exact nature of Yvette's shell companies and Reginald's frozen accounts. Chloe rapidly took notes, her stylus tapping furiously against her tablet screen. Do we release the statement to the blogs before the gala starts? She asked, looking up for confirmation. No, I commanded, turning back to face them with absolute finality. We release it to the press pool the exact second my father takes the stage to accept his Lifetime Leadership Award. We are going to put on our best evening gowns, walk into that ballroom, and sit directly in the front row. They think they are setting a brilliant trap to force my hand and steal my grandfather's money. But we are going to lock the doors behind them and burn their entire fake legacy to the ground. Get it done. The grand ballroom of the Hyatt Regency was a sea of crystal chandeliers and black tie opulence. The annual church and community gala was the absolute crown jewel of Atlanta's black elite social calendar. Mayors, senators, megachurch pastors, and corporate titans mingled over champagne and passed hors d'oeuvres. The room was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the heavy hum of networking. I stepped out of my chauffeured black SUV and onto the red carpet, wearing a custom emerald green silk gown that fit like liquid armor. Marcus stepped out beside me, looking immaculate in a tailored midnight blue tuxedo. Chloe flanked my right, holding a sleek black leather portfolio tightly against her side instead of a clutch. As we walked through the grand double doors, the entire ballroom seemed to hold its collective breath. The PR leak had done its exact job. The whispers started immediately spreading through the crowd like a lit match dropped on dry grass. I watched heads turn and eyes dart in my direction. I could feel the heavy stares of the church board members and the local politicians assessing me, dissecting the elder abuse rumors Tanisha had paid the tabloids to circulate that morning. They were looking for a crack in my armor. They were waiting to see if the rogue heiress would crumble under the weight of public scandal. I did not break a single drop of sweat. I kept my spine straight, my chin parallel to the floor, and my expression completely unbothered. Let them whisper. I navigated the crowded room with deliberate, measured steps. I guided my team directly toward the front of the massive ballroom, where the VIP head table sat elevated on a tiered platform. There they were, the architects of my attempted destruction. Reginald was holding court in a velvet dinner jacket, looking every bit the esteemed patriarch, waiting to receive his prestigious Lifetime Leadership Award. Yvette sat beside him, draped in heavy diamond jewelry that was undoubtedly paid for by the stolen funds from his commercial printing business. She was smiling for the event photographers, completely oblivious to the fact that my forensic auditors had already mapped out every single one of her anonymous Delaware shell companies. Tanisha and Preston were huddled close together, nursing cocktails and wearing matching expressions of arrogant anticipation. Preston looked slightly pale, his eyes darting around the room, likely terrified that his furious venture capital investors might crash the gala to demand their money back. Attorney Cross, their high-priced attack dog, sat at the end of the long table nursing a scotch and reviewing a stack of legal documents. Yvette spotted me first. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second, genuinely shocked that I had actually shown up after the digital massacre my reputation had endured all day. But that surprise quickly morphed into a vicious, triumphant sneer. She tapped Reginald on the shoulder and pointed a perfectly manicured finger in my direction. The entire VIP table turned to look at me. Tanisha actually laughed, leaning over to whisper something in Preston's ear. They thought my presence was an act of absolute surrender. They thought I had walked into the lion's den to quietly sign away Grandpa Elijah's $45 million shipping empire, simply to save my face in front of Atlanta's high society. Yvette leaned across the white tablecloth and caught Attorney Cross's attention. She gave him a sharp, definitive nod. It was the signal to execute their ambush. Attorney Cross stood up, smoothing the lapels of his expensive suit jacket. He did not approach me discreetly. He did not ask for a private word in the hallway. He walked down the carpeted stairs from the VIP platform and positioned himself directly in the center of the main walkway, intercepting me just as the mayor and several prominent city council members turned to watch. He wanted a public spectacle. He wanted to weaponize the audience to force my compliance. Keisha Gallagher, he announced, his voice booming unnaturally loud to ensure maximum visibility across the silent tables. He pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his inside jacket pocket, holding them up like a trophy. I have been instructed by your family to present you with a formal legal injunction. Given the severe and highly publicized allegations regarding your manipulation of Elijah Gallagher's estate, we are giving you one final opportunity to sign this immediate settlement. The surrounding crowd went dead silent. The string quartet playing in the corner of the room suddenly seemed deafening. People stopped chewing their food. Waiters froze in place holding trays of champagne. Cross stepped closer, thrusting the legal papers directly toward my chest. If you refuse to sign these documents transferring executive control of the trust back to your father, we will file an emergency petition with the probate court on Monday morning to have you legally removed for elder abuse, he declared, making sure his voice projected to the back row of the ballroom. We will also be forced to discuss these disturbing allegations openly during tonight's award presentation. Save yourself the humiliation, Keisha. Sign the papers, relinquish control of the assets, and step down. I looked down at the documents in his hand and then up into his smug, perfectly polished face. I did not reach for the pen he was offering. I did not shrink away from the hundreds of eyes currently burning into my back. I stood my ground, the emerald silk of my gown catching the light from the chandeliers. Marcus stepped forward slightly, his presence a silent, imposing threat, but I held up a single hand to stop him. I did not need my CEO to fight this battle. I looked past Attorney Cross and locked eyes directly with Yvette, who was watching the scene from the elevated VIP table with a look of pure predatory joy. She owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to luxury boutiques and private clubs. She had married Reginald, thinking he was a multimillionaire, only to realize his pockets were terrifyingly shallow. My grandfather's trust was her only way to avoid a federal prison sentence for the wire fraud she was committing to cover her high society debts. And she thought she had me cornered. Attorney Cross, I said, my voice ringing with a cold, crystal-clear authority that sliced through the heavy silence of the ballroom. You are standing in front of the mayor, the city council, and the most prominent business leaders in Atlanta, attempting to extort me with fabricated tabloid rumors. You are acting as a legal representative for a venture capital firm that is currently facing massive liquidity defaults and a woman who is actively embezzling funds across state lines. Attorney Cross blinked, his confident smile faltering for a fraction of a second. I beg your pardon, he stammered, lowering the paperwork slightly. I did not lower my voice. I amplified it. I am not signing your settlement cross. I am not stepping down, and I am not hiding. You wanted a public spectacle to try and force my hand. I am going to give you exactly what you asked for. Chloe handed him the files. I did not wait for Attorney Cross to process the heavy legal binder Chloe shoved aggressively into his chest. I simply stepped around him, treating him like a completely insignificant obstacle in my path. I marched straight past the velvet-draped VIP table, ignoring the sudden furious sputtering coming from my father. I was not heading for the exit, and I was not retreating. I was heading directly for the main audio-visual booth situated on a raised platform at the back corner of the grand stage. The head technician running the gala's massive production was a man named Derek. Derek had handled the complex lighting and sound design for every single one of my beauty brand's major product launches over the past 4 years. He was loyal, incredibly well compensated, and thoroughly briefed on exactly what I needed him to do tonight. I walked up the short flight of carpeted steps to the booth, my emerald silk gown trailing behind me like liquid glass. Derek did not ask a single question. He simply stepped aside and handed me the master auxiliary cable. I plugged it directly into my tablet. I tapped the screen, once syncing my device to the massive digital projectors suspended high above the stage. In a fraction of a second, the elegant gold and black Hyatt Regency Gala logo vanished from the 350-foot screens dominating the ballroom. It was instantly replaced by a stark, glaring financial flowchart. I reached out and plucked the primary wireless microphone right off the main podium, just as the gala announcer was stepping up to begin my father's introduction. The feedback whined sharply for a microsecond, causing a few startled gasps from the audience before I stabilized the audio. I looked out over the sea of Atlanta's absolute elite. The politicians, the megachurch pastors, the corporate titans, they were all frozen, staring up at the massive screens displaying the forensic audit of Yvette Banks. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice booming through the state-of-the-art surround sound system. The acoustics in the grand ballroom were flawless, carrying every single syllable to the very back rows. "My name is Keisha Gallagher. I am sure many of you have read the unfortunate and highly fabricated news blogs regarding my family this morning. My father and his legal counsel just attempted to use this prestigious gathering to force me into a blind financial settlement. Since they are so eager to handle family business in the public square, I decided to oblige them." I tapped my tablet. The screen zoomed in on a cluster of red boxes mapping out 3 specific anonymous corporate entities. I direct your attention to the screens behind me. I continued pacing slowly across the center of the stage. What you are looking at is a certified forensic financial audit of Banks Commercial Printing, my father's company. As you can see, over the last 14 months, the company has been bleeding capital. But it has not been losing money to market forces or poor management. It has been hemorrhaging cash into 3 specific shell companies registered in the state of Delaware. I paused, letting the weight of the words settle over the silent room. Yvette Banks was suddenly sitting bolt upright in her chair at the VIP table. The smug, victorious smirk had completely melted off her face, replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated terror. Her heavily jeweled hands were gripping the edge of the tablecloth so tightly her knuckles were white. These Delaware shell companies provide absolutely zero tangible services to the printing business. I announced, my voice echoing with lethal precision. They exist for one sole purpose: to siphon unregulated cash to a single primary beneficiary. I pressed a button on the tablet, and the screen highlighted the ownership documents of the LLCs, revealing Yvette's name in massive bold text. Yvette Banks has actively embezzled $800,000 from her husband's operating accounts, I stated, projecting the exact wire transfer logs for the entire ballroom to see. She did not steal this money to invest in real estate or secure a nest egg. She stole it to pay off hundreds of thousands of dollars in pre-existing debt to luxury boutiques in Buckhead, exclusive country clubs, and private social organizations. She married a man she assumed was wealthy, realized his pockets were shallow, and decided to systematically drain his company dry to fund a fake high society lifestyle. "Turn it off!" Yvette shrieked, jumping to her feet and knocking her crystal champagne flute onto the floor. The glass shattered, but the sound barely registered over the rising chaotic murmurs of the crowd. "Turn the screens off right now. Security, stop her." She waved frantically at the event staff lining the walls, but the security guards did not move an inch. They were under strict instructions from the hotel management not to intervene in domestic civil disputes unless there was physical violence. They simply stood by and watched the absolute destruction of a socialite in real time. My father was staring at the screens, his mouth hanging slightly open. He looked completely broken, paralyzed by the undeniable proof of his wife's massive financial betrayal. The man who had been ready to publicly humiliate me 10 minutes ago was now visibly shrinking in his velvet dinner jacket. "This lawsuit regarding my grandfather's estate is not about elder abuse," I told the crowd, my gaze sweeping across the shocked faces of the church board members. "It is a desperate extortion attempt designed to secure a $45 million payout. Yvette Banks needed my inheritance to replace the $800,000 she stole from her husband's company before the federal authorities noticed her wire fraud." "You are a vicious liar!" Tanisha screamed, suddenly lunging up from her seat beside Preston. She pointed a trembling finger at me from the VIP table, her face twisted in defensive rage. "You are just trying to deflect because you got caught stealing Grandpa Elijah's money. You fabricated those documents. Yvette would never do that, and Preston's lawyers are going to sue you for everything you own. You are just jealous of my husband and his success." I stopped pacing and looked down at my sister. The sheer delusion required to stand up and defend the woman destroying our father's business was staggering. But Tanisha was always entirely focused on protecting her own superficial image and the illusion of her perfect marriage. "I am so glad you brought up your husband, Tanisha," I said, my voice dropping into a register of pure absolute ice. I tapped my tablet again. The screens instantly shifted from Yvette's Delaware shell companies to a brand new forensic map. This one was titled Gallagher Strategic Ventures. Preston Gallagher physically recoiled in his chair. He had been hoping the focus would remain entirely on Yvette. He had been silently praying that my auditors had only traced the embezzlement and missed the broader financial corruption. He was wrong. The blood completely drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly and hollow. "Let us look at layer 2 of this family conspiracy," I announced, gesturing to the new data on the massive displays. Preston Gallagher operates a venture capital firm, or rather, he operates a sinking ship. He is currently facing massive liquidity defaults. He backed 3 startups that completely collapsed, and his institutional investors are executing their capital calls. He is entirely broke. Tanisha turned to look at Preston, her defensive fury suddenly faltering. She expected him to stand up and shout me down. She expected him to call his lawyers and command the room with his usual arrogant entitlement. But Preston was sweating profusely. He was wiping his forehead with a cloth napkin, his eyes darting frantically toward the ballroom exits. He was completely speechless. Because Preston Gallagher lacks the personal capital to cover his massive debts, he decided to secure an illegal bridge loan. I continued relentless in my execution. But he did not use his own assets as collateral. I swiped the tablet, pulling up a highly magnified scan of a complex commercial loan agreement. He used Bank's commercial printing as the sole financial guarantor for his venture capital debts. I revealed the words ringing out like gunshots. He legally attached his father-in-law's business to his own failing company without authorization. And to push the paperwork through the bank, Preston Gallagher intentionally and deliberately forged Reginald Bank's signature on the primary collateral documents. The gasp that ripped through the ballroom was collective and deafening. Tanisha slowly backed away from Preston, her face a mask of absolute horror. She stared at the forged documents glowing brightly on the 50-foot screens, and then looked down at her white husband, the man she had constantly weaponized against me, to prove her own superiority. The man she claimed was a financial genius. The saviors of the bank's family legacy were officially exposed as nothing but desperate financial parasites. Preston tried to stand up, his knees visibly shaking. He opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, strangled sound came out. The pristine, powerful image he had cultivated in Atlanta's business community was instantly incinerated. He was no longer a respected venture capitalist. He was a cornered, terrified fraud staring at the undeniable proof of his own felonies. "This is actionable defamation," Attorney Cross suddenly bellowed, finally finding his voice and stepping forward to shield his wealthy clients. He pointed aggressively at me from the base of the stage, trying to salvage whatever shred of his own legal career remained. "You are projecting unverified, unauthorized financial documents in a public forum. I will personally see you ruined for this, Keisha. I will have you stripped of your corporate standing and buried in civil litigation for the rest of your natural life." I looked down at the corrupt lawyer, feeling a wave of pure, profound satisfaction. He was the final piece of the puzzle. He was the legal attack dog who had happily facilitated their extortion attempt, thinking he could bully a young black female CEO into submission. "I would not speak so quickly about unverified evidence, Mr. Cross," I replied, my tone dangerously quiet. "Especially when you are the one leaving a digital footprint." I tapped my tablet for the final time. The screens did not change to a new financial document. Instead, a simple audio waveform appeared on the displays. It was a digital rendering of a crystal-clear security recording. "When you and Yvette decided to visit my private loft to deliver your initial threats, you failed to realize that my entire residence is equipped with high-definition security surveillance," I informed the silent, horrified crowd, "including the private foyer where you held your little strategic huddle before knocking on my door." I hit play. The audio echoed perfectly through the massive ballroom speakers, cutting through the tension like a razor blade. Yvette's voice filled the room, sharp and calculating. "We just need to squeeze her." Elijah's mind was fine, but the blogs will eat up the dementia angle. It will ruin her brand. It will force a settlement. Attorney Cross's voice immediately followed, slick and confident. "We file the injunction publicly. She pays the $45 million to make it go away, and no one looks too closely at Reginald's business accounts. It is a clean sweep." The audio file clicked off, plunging the ballroom into a state of absolute stunned paralysis. The recording was the final lethal hammer blow. It was undeniable, irrefutable proof that the elder abuse lawsuit was a complete malicious fabrication designed solely to extort me for a quick cash settlement. They had confessed their entire criminal conspiracy on my own front porch. The grand ballroom of the Hyatt Regency erupted into absolute chaos. The low murmurs instantly transformed into a roar of shock, outrage, and rapid-fire conversations. The elite crowd recoiled from the VIP table, as if Yvette and Preston were highly contagious. The mega-church pastor, a towering man with immense influence in the community, immediately marched away from his table and climbed the steps to the secondary podium, grabbing the backup microphone. "Order," he commanded, his deep voice echoing over the frantic crowd. "We will have order in this room." The pastor turned his fierce, unwavering glare directly onto my father, who was now weeping silently into his hands at the head table. "Reginald Banks, in light of this undeniable evidence of profound moral and financial corruption, the board has decided to immediately rescind your Lifetime Leadership Award. You have brought disgrace upon this community." Yvette did not wait to hear the rest of the pastor's condemnation. She scrambled out of her chair, grabbing her expensive designer purse and practically tripping over the hem of her gown. She shoved past Tanisha, who was still frozen in shock, staring at Preston. Yvette was making a desperate, frantic dash for the side exit, trying to escape the room before the reality of her situation fully materialized. She did not make it. The heavy oak double doors at the back of the ballroom suddenly swung open with a loud, definitive crash. A team of stern-faced men and women wearing dark windbreakers with federal badges clipped to their belts stepped into the room. They were the local financial fraud investigators tipped off precisely on time by Marcus and my legal team. They moved through the crowd with absolute focused authority, heading straight for the VIP table. I stood on the stage holding the microphone, looking out over the utter destruction of the people who had tried to break me. The press pool was frantically snapping photographs, their camera flashes illuminating Yvette's terrified face as the investigators intercepted her near the exit. Preston was slumping into his chair, his head in his hands as two agents flanked him, requesting he stand up and place his hands behind his back. I had not just survived their ambush, I had completely redefined the rules of engagement. I handed the microphone back to Derek and walked calmly down the steps of the stage, my emerald gown flowing flawlessly behind me. I joined Marcus and Chloe, who were waiting near the exit, their faces reflecting the same cold satisfaction that settled deep in my chest. The war was officially over, and I had left absolutely no survivors. The Monday morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling glass of my corner office, casting long, sharp shadows across the polished mahogany. The air conditioning hummed a low, steady rhythm. I stood at my espresso machine pouring a perfect double shot of dark roast. The weekend had been a masterclass in absolute destruction, and the corporate fallout was currently raining down on Atlanta like volcanic ash. Chloe marched into my office, her tablet practically glowing with fresh data. She did not even bother to sit down. She paced the length of the room reading the morning financial briefs with a bright, unapologetic smile. "The execution was flawless," she announced, tapping her screen. "Preston Gallagher is officially financially deceased. The venture capital investors did not even wait for the sun to rise on Sunday. The second the footage from the gala hit the digital blogs, his institutional backers triggered emergency extraction clauses. They pulled every single cent of their capital and filed immediate injunctions to freeze his remaining corporate assets." I took a slow sip of my espresso, letting the bitter, rich flavor settle on my tongue. "And his licenses?" "Revoked." Chloe confirmed, her smile widening. "The State Financial Regulatory Board moved faster than I have ever seen. Preston's broker licenses and his corporate trading privileges were suspended indefinitely pending the federal investigation. He cannot legally trade a single dime. Gallagher Strategic Ventures is filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy by noon today. He is completely liquidated." I walked back to my desk and set the porcelain cup down. Preston had built his entire identity on the illusion of financial supremacy. He had walked into my grandfather's house and looked down his nose at our generational wealth, believing his tailored suits and venture capital buzzwords made him untouchable. He had weaponized his privilege to try and steal what my family had built. Now he was a disgraced bankrupt felon, waiting for a federal indictment. "And Yvette?" I asked, taking my seat. "Currently out on a $500,000 bail," Chloe replied, swiping to a new document. "But she is restricted to state lines and forced to wear a GPS monitor. The federal prosecutors are not offering a plea deal. They are pursuing maximum state charges for the wire fraud, the embezzlement, and the forgery. She is staring at a mandatory minimum of 15 years. And Attorney Cross is nowhere to be found." The second the investigators walked into the Hyatt ballroom, Cross vanished. Our legal team confirmed he formally dropped Yvette and Preston as clients at 3 a.m. on Sunday. He is currently scrambling to secure his own defense counsel to avoid being disbarred for his role in the extortion plot. He flipped on them to save his own skin. "There is no loyalty among parasites," I noted, resting my hands on the cool leather of my desk pad. "What about Tanisha?" Chloe let out a sharp breath, shaking her head. "It is a complete social massacre, Keisha. Tanisha's high society friends have entirely abandoned her. Her country club membership was quietly revoked yesterday afternoon. Preston's assets are frozen, so they cannot make the mortgage payments on that massive Buckhead estate. The house officially went up for sale this morning. I checked the MLS listings myself. Tanisha is packing boxes. Her entire identity was tied to Preston's fake wealth, and now she has absolutely nothing. She is calling everyone in her contacts begging for a place to stay, but nobody is answering the phone. Let them drown! I commanded, my voice completely devoid of pity. They built their entire lives on a foundation of lies and theft. They tried to bury me under a mountain of fabricated abuse charges just to keep the champagne flowing. Now they get to drink the water they poisoned. Keep monitoring the federal dockets, Chloe. I want to know the exact minute the grand jury hands down the formal indictments. 3 weeks passed. The media storm surrounding the gala eventually shifted its focus from my family's spectacular implosion to the rapid, aggressive expansion of my beauty brand. We launched our new retail partnerships without a single hitch. Sales were up 40%. My grandfather's shipping trust was officially cleared of all probate holds. I was winning on every conceivable front. I was reviewing the final quarterly projections when my private intercom buzzed. Keisha Chloe's voice filtered through the speaker, tight and cautious. Reginald Banks is in the lobby. Security is asking if they should escort him out of the building. I stopped typing. I stared at the blinking light on the console. My father had not attempted to contact me since the night of the gala. His printing business was in receivership. His wife was facing a decade in federal prison. I had assumed he would simply fade into the background, too ashamed to ever face me again. But Reginald Banks always possessed an astonishing level of unearned entitlement. "Send him up," I instructed, my voice flat. "Tell security to wait right outside my office doors." 5 minutes later, the heavy oak doors opened. Reginald walked in, and the sight of him was genuinely shocking. The arrogant, booming patriarch who had tried to intimidate me over the phone was completely gone. He looked like he had aged 20 years in 20 days. His custom-tailored suit hung loosely on his shrinking frame. The fabric was wrinkled. His hair lacked its usual precise grooming. He looked frail, broken, and utterly defeated. He stopped in the center of the room, clutching a worn leather briefcase, staring at me with hollow, bloodshot eyes. "Keisha," he began, his voice barely a raspy whisper. "Thank you for seeing me." I did not offer him a seat. I did not offer him a drink. I sat behind my desk, hands folded, waiting. "Why are you here, Reginald?" He flinched at the use of his first name. He took a hesitant step forward, his hands trembling slightly. "I need your help. The business is gone, Keisha. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on the commercial printing presses this morning. Yvette's lawyers have drained whatever personal savings I had left, just to keep her out of a federal holding cell before the trial. I am losing the house. I am losing everything." He swallowed hard, tears pooling in the corners of his eyes. "You have the $45 million trust now. It is fully in your control. I am your father, Keisha. We are flesh and blood. I am asking you, I am begging you for a bailout, just enough to clear the commercial debt and keep the printing business afloat. Family loyalty has to mean something." I looked at the man who had helped create me. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no sorrow, no sympathy. Just a profound, permanent emptiness where a daughter's love used to reside. "Family loyalty." I repeated the words, tasting like ash. "You want to talk to me about family loyalty? Where was your family loyalty when you sat back and let Yvette and Tanisha drag Grandpa Elijah's name through the mud? Where was your loyalty when you watched them leak fabricated stories to the tabloids, claiming I abused the man who built this entire legacy?" "Keisha." "I did not know the full extent of what they were doing," he pleaded, taking another step forward. "I was desperate. Yvette told me the settlement would save us." "You knew exactly what they were doing?" I fired back, my voice rising, cutting through the quiet office like a whip. "You knew they were lying. You knew Yvette was stealing from your own company to fund her shopping addiction, and you looked the other way because you liked the shiny, expensive lifestyle she paraded around. You liked feeling like a big shot at the country club. You chose a fake high society image over the safety and reputation of your own daughter. You stood at a VIP table and threatened to destroy my career on a microphone if I did not surrender my birthright to a pair of felons." Reginald hung his head, his shoulders shaking with silent, pathetic sobs. "I made a mistake. I was weak." "You were not weak," I corrected, my tone dropping to a lethal whisper. "You were greedy. You were perfectly willing to throw me to the wolves as long as you got to keep your velvet jackets and your award ceremonies. But the wolves turned around and bit you instead." "Please, Keisha," he begged, dropping to his knees on the carpeted floor right in front of my desk. "Please do not let me lose the business. It is the only thing I have left of the bank's name." I stood up, looking down at him. Grandpa Elijah built this empire from the ground up. He worked until his hands bled to ensure we would never have to beg anyone for a seat at the table. He left the trust to me because he knew you lacked the spine to protect it. You do not get to invoke the bank's name to save yourself from the consequences of your own cowardice. I pressed the button on my intercom. Security, please escort Reginald out of the building. Reginald looked up at me, his face twisted in desperate agony. You are going to let me go bankrupt. You are going to give me nothing. You earned exactly what you are getting, I stated, turning my back to him and looking out the window at the city. You get nothing. The security guard stepped into the office, pulling my father to his feet and guiding him out the door. He did not fight them. He just wept quietly, his footsteps shuffling against the hardwood until the heavy oak doors clicked shut, sealing him out of my life forever. A week later, the final legal transfer of the $45 million trust was officially executed. I sat in a pristine glass-walled conference room at my corporate banking headquarters, surrounded by a small army of financial advisors and estate attorneys. The paperwork was dense, a mountain of legalese and asset management protocols. I picked up the heavy gold fountain pen and signed my name on the final dotted line, cementing my absolute ownership of Grandpa Elijah's shipping empire. Congratulations, Miss Banks, the lead attorney said, sliding the documents into a secure portfolio. The assets are fully liquid and entirely under your discretionary control. I did not hesitate. I had been planning this move since the night of the gala. I slid a separate manila folder across the polished conference table toward the banking executives. I am establishing a new foundational entity. I announced, my voice steady and resolute. I am taking $5 million from the liquid trust assets and creating the Elijah Banks Trust for independent Black creatives. The banking executives looked momentarily surprised, but quickly began reviewing the documentation I had prepared. I built my beauty brand from absolute scratch, I explained, looking around the table at the men in their gray suits. I know exactly how hard it is for young Black entrepreneurs and artists to secure capital without predatory investors trying to steal their equity. My grandfather built a shipping company to create generational wealth. I am going to use a fraction of that wealth to ensure the next generation of creatives does not have to fight the same grueling battles I did. The trust will provide zero-interest startup capital, aggressive legal shielding, and mentorship programs for Black women launching independent businesses in Atlanta. The lead attorney smiled, genuinely impressed. It is a brilliant initiative, Ms. Banks. We will have the foundational paperwork filed by tomorrow morning. Your grandfather would be incredibly proud of this legacy. He already is, I replied, standing up and shaking their hands. That evening, I stood alone on the sprawling wrap-around balcony of my penthouse. The Atlanta skyline stretched out before me, a glittering ocean of neon and glass against the dark velvet sky. The summer air was warm and heavy, carrying the distant sounds of the city traffic below. I leaned against the glass railing, holding a mug of dark roast coffee, letting the profound, absolute peace wash over me. There were no more tabloids, there were no more extortion plots. Preston and Yvette were fighting for their lives in federal court. Tanisha had moved into a small rented apartment, her social climbing days permanently over. Reginald had officially filed for bankruptcy, his commercial printing presses auctioned off to the highest bidder. The toxic, suffocating structures that had tried to erase me had been entirely dismantled by my own hands. My phone buzzed softly in the pocket of my silk robe. I pulled it out, glancing at the glowing screen. It was an automated notification from my beauty brand's executive dashboard. The latest midnight product drop had sold out in less than 14 minutes. The profit margins were shattering our previous quarterly records. I took a slow, quiet sip of my coffee, the rich caffeine warming my chest. I looked out over the empire I had built, the city I had conquered, and the future I completely controlled. I had protected my grandfather's name. I had secured my own wealth. I had drawn an ironclad boundary around my peace and enforced it with absolute ruthless precision. I smiled at the glittering skyline, the digital notification glowing brightly in my hand. I was Keisha Banks. I was entirely free, and I was exactly where I belonged. The most profound lesson we can draw from this story is that shared blood does not automatically guarantee loyalty, love, or respect. Sometimes the most toxic environments are the ones we are born into, and the people expected to protect us are the ones causing the deepest harm. True empowerment begins when you stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you. Reclaiming your narrative means establishing ironclad boundaries and recognizing that walking away from a destructive family is not an act of failure, but an act of profound self-preservation. You are the ultimate architect of your own success. If you have ever had to break free from toxic family expectations to protect your peace, share your journey with us in the comments below.